I think we should have understood earlier that what the end result has been is that we've taught Christians to live their life the same as non-Christians. And one of the big parts of that is to start treating marriage and children like they're a choice. And once that's a choice, you get into the discussion, is it pro-life or pro-choice? And then once the pro-choice discussion has evolved, it's like, well, is it pro-life or I want to kill my baby whenever? This whole mass push to make abortion legal anywhere has resulted in the sacrifice of 3.5 billion children since 1973.
3.5 billion.
Men in this country are at a jobless rate that rivals that of the Great Depression. The only reason we don't notice it is because 70% of women of working age have jobs, while only something like 38% of men do.
No way.
Yeah. The marriage rate is at an all-time low. The fertility rate is at an all-time low. Men between your age and his age, sperm count is lower than it's ever been in, recorded history of keeping track of such things.
Wow.
It's just, there's lots of challenges.
Welcome back to On the Line. In today's episode, we have the pleasure of sitting down with Dr. Scott Keith, who is an executive director at 1517. So in the first part of this interview, we talk about 1517, its origins, backdrop, why they do what they do. Great conversation there. And then we move into one of his wheelhouse areas, which is masculinity and fatherhood. And he has just some shocking statistics that he shares that he's worked on in some of his books, and also some great anecdotes on how to recover Christian masculinity and also an engaged type of fatherhood or parenting. We hope you enjoy this episode. This was a very enjoyable discussion from my perspective, and I hope that you enjoy it as well. Take care, and God bless.
Yeah. Oh, actually, I listened to the Dave Smith one until he got to the abortion talk, and then I got so frustrated that I wanted to throw my phone through the airport window.
Yeah. Not right for a guy to tell.
Well, it's like you wouldn't tell a guy not to get a vasectomy. I'm like, okay, killing a baby is not like getting a vasectomy, first of all. And maybe we should be telling more guys not to get vasectomies.
Yeah.
So
we had a guy on the podcast talk about that, and we had a couple guys that we know of that reversed their vasectomies.
I'm too old, but I would have. I completely regret it. I don't live life in regret, but that's, if I were to pick one, that would be like top of the list, just absolute top of the list.
Yeah.
So one, maybe we should tell more guys not to, and two, like, it's not killing a baby. So this is not a good analogy.
I feel like Dave really wanted to jump in. I don't think he agreed. He just he didn't. You can tell he was kind of waffling, and he was just kind of took the easy route of not pushing back.
I was texting my buddy Dan Price, who works with me, and he said, I don't think Dave knew what line of argument to take. And I'm like, he's a libertarian. So you take the non-aggression principle, you call it a person, you say you're not allowed to aggress it. It's not a difficult line of argumentation. Dave's totally capable of this.
And he's one of the best, he's so articulate.
I feel like he didn't want to piss Joe Rogan off.
I think so too.
He just kept his mouth shut because he wants to go on Joe Rogan again.
Yeah.
But man, it was a horrible line. And Dave's the one that walked him right into it, talking about watching the abortion documentary with his wife.
Yeah. Yeah. So you knew that he was, kind of fed up with at least.
I think he was trying to use that watching that documentary as an example to jump into another conversation, and Joe just grabbed that. And then all of a sudden they're in abortion, and Dave's like,
I feel like Joe felt like he had to do it, maybe because he had come out and endorsed, Trump and all of that. And he just had all those guys on. And I felt like he just needed to kind of he felt like he had to throw some bones to his more liberal side to be like, I'm with Trump and but not abortion,
Yeah. It's just it's her body argument is such a weak argument. I mean, it's just first year college student in a ethics 101 class can debunk this thing as soon as you identify it as a separate person. Housing in a woman, that argument's gone.
Yeah. We had John D. Davidson on, and he had written a book called Pagan America, but he dealt with that in his book. But he basically tracked. He said, book. "Oh, did you? Yeah, great book, isn't it?"
Yeah.
Where he kind of tracks, and he says they're not even really making that argument. Like, they're not trying to even make logical arguments anymore. They're just kind of making emotional, and they've kind of given up on that front. I think
the really sad part of the abortion discussion. Well, maybe it's not sad, maybe it's good, but it makes me feel like I live in a pretty dirty place that they have stopped talking about it as choice versus freedom,
Mm-hmm.
or limits of choice versus freedom. And now we talk about it straight up as I have to have the right to kill my baby whenever I want.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, my Lord, like, talk about pagan. This is paganism.
Yeah.
Like, the trans stuff is paganism. This is paganism. We are not only sacrificing children, but we're sacrificing their body parts to appease some, unnamed God that
Mhm.
is cultural assent. And it's absolutely disgusting. Like,
Yeah.
it's genocide. I
Mhm.
think I was in Europe this summer and just I was swimming in a lake and just happened to run across this guy from Chechnya, and we struck up a conversation, and he's like, oh, you're American? And I said, yeah. He goes, well, I won't offend you with my opinions. I'm like, you're not going to offend me. Go for it. And he's like, you've exported the worst of your country to the rest of the world. And I said, I completely agree. And he said, this whole like mass push to make abortion legal anywhere has resulted in the sacrifice of 3.5 billion children since 1973.
3.5 billion.
Billion.
Wow.
And now we're in this, we're officially in population decline in almost everywhere, And you think back on that, and the population decline almost everywhere is it's gonna hit like a ton of bricks on. I mean, it's already hitting in church. Churches see this, I think, more than anywhere else, with aging populations. But the world is going to see this with aging populations. Everyone looked at our election system and they saw, oh my gosh, can we get two guys that aren't 80 years old? And I'm sitting there going, no, you live in a gerontocracy. This is what you get.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there aren't, pretty soon this is what you accept. And also, there are fewer people to innovate.
Mm-hmm.
It's like 1% of the population is capable of innovation and creating new technologies. We had a pretty good run because there was lots of people, and by the numbers, that 1% was more people. But when you have fewer people, that 1% is also fewer people.
Mm-hmm.
You have fewer people to can maintain infrastructure. You have fewer people to pay into all of our social programs. This is not a good thing, and we've intentionally decided to shoot ourselves in the foot, not to mention the evil of just killing 3.5 billion people, but also to shoot yourself in the foot when it comes to the maintaining population by getting rid of 3.5 billion people that would have still been here.
Yeah. Yeah. Even like military, I think
Right.
RFK Jr. was talking about that, where I think it's something like 23 or 25%. Bennett, I don't know if you remember the number, but it's right around there of people, of men that that are even capable of fighting in the military because of mental health or obesity or all of these other things.
I heard 15%, that it's only 15% of sort of the military age population that can pass the physical agility test necessary to.
Jeez, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just don't, for us, that's not we really specialize in first order proclamation. So we don't talk about this stuff a lot on our channels specifically, but it concerns all of us. This is not great. This is not good. This is something that we should all kind of feel responsible for in some way.
So what is it? Between the age of 17 to 24, 23%. I'm sure at one point it was pretty close.
Well, yeah, I mean, it should at least be.
And our standards are lower than they were, 40, 50 years ago.
No kidding. I don't think you have to do a bunch of pull-ups anymore to qualify.
Yeah. Are we live, by the way, Bennett? We are live. Okay. So when you were referencing our channel, you're talking about 1517.
Correct.
And when you were saying, you said first order proclamation?
Right.
What do you mean by that?
So first order proclamation is the difference between preaching about the gospel and preaching the gospel to the sinner. So about the gospel would be sort of all the facts of the life, death, resurrection of Christ. It's precursory work to preaching the gospel to the sinner, which is not only did Christ live, die, and rise in history, for the world and as an objective fact, all which is true, but he did so for you, right? And that the person that benefits from this is you.
Mhm.
That you are justified, you are saved, you are adopted, you will reap the benefits of the first fruits of his resurrection, right? And it's the difference between me telling you about Jesus and actually giving you Jesus.
Mhm. Who's kind of your audience there? Is it like, or do you guys see this as a tool of reaching people who maybe are not Christians and are maybe kind of in a
Well,
place of like struggling? Like, is that a primary audience for you
well,
guys?
sure. I'd say everybody is an audience because everybody needs to hear that. I mean, Rod Rosenblatt used to say we need to proclaim to Christians that Jesus died for Christians too, right?
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's a great day in the 1517 house when we get an email about a non-Christian who heard this message and was converted to the faith and then did some initial catechesis work through listening to our podcast or something like that, and now they're in a good Lutheran church somewhere and they brought their family with them and they're talking to their extended family. That's amazing.
Mhm.
But most people don't even hear that in their church. Now a lot of people do, so I guess I shouldn't say most. I don't actually know the numbers, but a lot of people don't. Like it's fair to say that in almost every American evangelical church, you're not going to hear that message. You're probably going to
Mhm.
get some list, on Sunday morning about what you can do to improve your walk with Jesus or to be a better husband for Jesus or, better whatever for Jesus. Um, and even within a lot of Lutheran churches, Lutherans are good at knowing the gospel, right? So most Lutheran churches, you're going to get at least good second order gospel in your sermon on Sunday.
And what's second order gospel?
So that's going to be describing it. That's the
Mhm.
descriptive act rather than sort of the proclaiming act. For me, I make the distinction like there's a lot of second order work and this was my lecture last night. There's a lot of second order work that's needed in order to do the first order work of proclaiming to the sinner that their sins are forgiven.
Mhm.
You could think of the difference being sort of like you wouldn't expect Bible class to accomplish what absolution accomplishes in the service. Why do
Mhm.
you expect, absolution in the service to accomplish what Bible class does?
Mm.
That those are two different categories. And then sort of we do that. We try to do a lot of that in everything that we do. Now, you can't do it in all things because our podcast. We have a history podcast. Thinking Fellows, one of the podcasts I host, is theology, history, apologetics, philosophy.
And
But
you've
we
got
have,
Adam Francisco on there
yeah,
as
Adam
well. Yeah, we've
Francisco's
had him
on
on
there.
before.
We try to come back to it all the time.
Mhm.
But I mean, our our mission is to declare and defend the good news that you're forgiven and free on account of Christ alone.
Mhm.
And we call that the pointing end of the stick. And everything we do, we try to get back to that pointing end of the stick.
Mm.
It doesn't mean that we don't do other stuff too. We do. Of course we do. You can't, difficult to stay in that one lane all the time. But we try to really protect against mission drift. We don't do a lot of sort of one-sided cultural commentary or political commentary
Mhm.
and stuff like that. We kind of try to stay pointed at the proclamation of the gospel and the defense of the gospel for the sinner.
Has that been like an ongoing conversation for you guys? Like, so you kind of created like your mission at first and said, okay, here's going to be kind of our niche,
Yeah.
within Christianity or within Lutheranism. Have you guys wrestled with like, okay, do we want to incorporate more second, or has that been a conversation? I guess is what I'm
I'd say
asking.
I'd go the other way. Early on, we incorporated other conversations, and as we've gotten older, we've narrowed it down to try to make it more and more about the one conversation.
Okay.
So we've kind of moved the other way.
Mhm.
There's always a push. I mean, I'd give you, for instance, I believe that sort of Thinking Fellows does very, very well for a sort of niche Lutheran podcast. Like I'd say we're probably number one in that field on the podcast side, but we could do hundreds of thousands of more downloads if we recorded the pre-conversations where we're talking about politics and culture and,
Mhm.
getting passionate about what culture makes us feel like about raising kids and grandkids in this time and that type of thing. But that's not our mission.
Mhm.
That's just not our mission.
You're trying to keep it right in that niche and
Trying
say,
to keep
let's,
it in the
yeah.
niche. So we do a little bit of that, but we're always careful to bring it back to, the main thing,
Mhm.
because that's our ministry. That's what we do. And so
Mhm.
it's peppered here and there. The other stuff is peppered here and there, but the meat and potatoes is proclaiming and defending the gospel of Christ Jesus.
Mhm. So what's kind of your response? And maybe you've kind of already gestured towards this, right? But we've heard people, and you've heard people too. We were talking about this a little beforehand, but that will have reservations, and I want to say that that's, a certain group of people, and you obviously have a big following and whatnot, but there's some people that have reservations and say, maybe the shying away of like a third use of the law or something, which is
Sure.
kind of what you're talking about. What's your response to them? Because I want to give you a chance to be able to articulate that.
It's kind of well, on the one side, we've stopped responding to them a long time ago because it just wasn't fruitful,
Yeah.
Most of these sort of problems with us come via social media somehow. And a long time ago, we discovered that trying to engage in a meaningful discussion with somebody where you're trying to change their mind via the medium they're coming after you on social media just doesn't work.
No, it doesn't.
And
Yeah.
so we don't respond to it for the most part.
Mhm.
But my response is we don't shy away from third use law. We don't shy away from ethics. We don't shy away from good works. I mean, if people think we do, I would reference them to listen to any of our conference talks on YouTube, and all of them. I would argue that at our conference talks, we proclaim the law harder than you're going to hear anywhere else.
Mm.
It's just actually the proclamation of the law. It's intended to kill and to make alive, and then to bring the gospel to make alive. It's not intended to sort of mommy them or nanny them into being a better X, Y, or Z at Jesus, which is what a lot of preaching of the law is now. I mean, Christ gave the law to kill the sinner and the sin, and we've sort of taken it and said, well, that's fine and all, but I'd rather it continue to be the pedagogue. I'd rather it continue to be the schoolmarm. Okay, well, can it do some of that? Absolutely. I mean, is that one of the functions of the law? If you want to systematize out the law like that and call it one of the functions of the law, sure, it's one of the functions of the law. And in the New Testament, there are particular encouragements for Christians when it comes to living the Christian life. Absolutely. And should they be taught and even preached? Absolutely. Are they the main thing? No. Is it the thing that's actually going to change the heart and thus change the behavior of the person in the long term? No. There's no promise in the scripture that preaching the law, third function or otherwise, is actually going to change a person.
Mm-hmm.
What changes the person is their new life in Christ. What changes the person is the power of the Holy Spirit that comes along with the proclamation of the gospel. It is the thing that the New Testament says brings with it the power of God. The power that the law brings is to accuse and kill. Okay, that's necessary too, right? So we do both. But if we call sort of this encouragement for better behavior like the main function of Christianity, you're really, really missing the mark of how Jesus taught, how Paul taught. You're just not centering on the center.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean that those teachings aren't there. Of course they're there. They're just not the center.
So you're okay with the three uses of the law. Your concern is if the third use becomes like the primary use. It.
Yeah, I mean, how far? I know you got a lot of time. How far deep do you want to go into this?
We can go deep. Yeah.
Okay. So what we call the three uses of the law, or the three functions of the law, were not a thing in Christianity until Melanchthon thought them up in 1535 in his middle editions of the Loci Communis. Okay. This is where he, for the first time, was dealing with the idea, and he's coming right out of the first antinomian controversy, of which he was the guy saying the law still had to be preached, by the way, in that controversy. He's coming right out of that. And so he's struggling with, yeah, I mean, they kind of have a point. If the gospel is the power of God into salvation, what is the law to Christians then? And he's trying to express it in a way to pastors that they can, at the end of the day, teach and preach to their congregation, right? So he makes a list. Melanchthon loves lists. He is a list guy. If you read that middle edition of the Loci, you're not only going to find three functions of the law in the section on the law, you're going to find the four parts of the gospel in the section on the gospel. We don't ever talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we talk about the law so much? Maybe because that's the inclination of our heart, but again, set that aside for a second. So in 1535, he comes up with this formulation, and he comes up with the three functions of the law. And at the end of the day, we know them. The first one is kind of how God maintains all things. When I teach this, I'm like, this is not only the fact that he restrains the behavior of the elect and not elect alike, or the saved and not saved alike, but this is it. This includes everything. This is the fact that you have gravity, that the sun comes up in the morning, that God sends the rain to fall on the just and the unjust alike.
Mm.
You can actually put everything under this category of God keeping sin in check for Christians and non-Christians alike, right? That second function of the law is the preached function of the law. And this is why I say in preaching, this is the one you need, right? The preached function of the law is to accuse and kill. It lends into what both Melanchthon and Luther thought was the role of the pastor or the preacher, which is to get up in that pulpit on Sunday morning and kill the old Adam and make alive with the preaching of the gospel every Sunday, right? So that third function is the one where you hear God's righteous demands for your life. You realize that you're nowhere close to that and you are broken down by it.
Mm-hmm.
And then along comes Christ with the gospel and he resurrects you in him.
Mm.
That third function of the law is the one that that everybody and new Christians get it intuitively. You don't have to teach them new or functions of the law. A new Christian comes to the faith and they ask one question right out of the gate. Man, this is amazing. Jesus died for me. I was such a miserable turd. I can't believe he died for me. I love this so much. What can I do for God? Mm-hmm. Right? Now, when you get to this third function of the law, on the strict theological side, the answer of what can I do for God is nothing, right? You don't have anything God needs, and everything you have, he gave you anyway. But then we talk about, but there's still a way that we can teach you how to live under this third function of the law. And we're going to get into vocation. We're going to talk to you about the people God has put into your life and the service that you can provide the people that God has put into your life. And you can talk like Luther does about being a little Christ in the life of the people around you. You can talk about the fact that being a Christian means not only sort of living out your daily vocations, but also your vocation as a Christian, which is going to be to have the good news of Jesus Christ on your lips to those people, mm-hmm. to your wife, to your children, to your mother, to your father, to your aunts, to your uncles, to your neighbors that live near you, to the people that you work with, to the people that God throws in your life that you would have never known were going to be there, mm-hmm. right? Both of those things. Should we talk about that? Should we teach that? Absolutely. Is that something that should be referenced and that pastors should not just talk about, but sort of
embody to some degree,
and embody to some degree, right? You can describe it, but it can also be denotative. You can point to it and say it's a little bit like that over there. Mm-hmm. So no, I don't deny that.
Yeah.
I think our overemphasis on it in modern Lutheranism is a little unhelpful.
What's your thoughts on? Because I've wrestled with this and I continue to wrestle with this, but I find more and more, so for instance, we were talking about abortion, early on, and that came up in a sermon very recently. I mean, it just kind of fit in with the text and the timing was well, right? But I find more and more that some people who are Christians, like they don't even necessarily understand just what the law is. Meaning, like they don't understand, like, oh, like I'm actually supposed to be pro-life. I think it's 46% of Lutherans or whatnot. Yeah. So obviously, you said that there's certainly a place for it, and you don't deny that. But is there a chance there's also like even more of a like need for that now because more people are Christians?
More secular society.
Yeah, exactly.
Even Christians live secular lives.
Yeah. They're just so influenced by the culture around that they're just naive. They're just blinded to that. Like they may come to faith for sure, and great that God has worked that repentance into their life. But there might be huge areas of their life that they don't even know they're supposed to repent of.
Oh yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. The question is, sort of structurally within your work as a pastor, where does it fit? And it's maybe it's the Melanchthon in me, and I'm always trying to figure out the right locus, where the locus fits in the right place. But where does it fit? Does it fit in a sermon? I don't have the I don't want to call it a burden, the responsibility of preaching every Sunday. I just don't. Like, that's not what my life is. I preach occasionally, but I do not have the burden or the responsibility of doing it every Sunday. So I'm not the guy that's going to tell you exactly what should be in your sermon every Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not. I can tell you this: I probably sit in the pews more than you do.
Mm-hmm.
I probably sit in different pews than you do on a regular basis because of my travels. And I can tell you that, there is a form of bad preaching that only tells me that abortion is wrong, which, the fifth commandment would tell me too, but, and then just kind of leaves me hearing something that I already know. And it's like, okay. And that actually has no power to change me in a way, or to keep me in that faith that informs that and everything.
Mm-hmm.
There's absolutely a place for it. There's a place for all sorts of education and catechesis in the congregational life and in the family life. I mean, I just did a gig last week in Wisconsin at a LCMS church in Wisconsin. It was like a men's dinner thing. 150 guys show up to this thing on a Friday night. I think it was a Friday night. It was amazing. Like, they go out barbecue, then they come and listen to me talk for an hour and a half. And I just laid out the reality for them. I'm like, listen, in your vocational life, God gives you 3 commands right out of the gate: get a job, get married, have babies. And the young guys in this crowd, they're not doing that. And you older guys in this crowd didn't teach your children to prioritize that. You taught them to go to college, go to graduate school, get a perfect internship, make money, buy a house, and then when you're 33, start thinking about getting married and having kids. And by the way, you probably came somewhat sexually mature at somewhere between 13 to 15. And I'm going to tell you to be abstinent till you're 33. Good luck with that. And when it doesn't happen, we don't address it. We just sort of look the other way at the live-in girlfriend, or, the 7-year fornicating relationship, and go, la, 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 maybe someday they'll get married. And then when they do, we're like, oh, thank goodness, I'm so proud of you. It's like, well, no, that's not it. But it's not necessarily their fault that they haven't done that. Did you raise them with the other priorities in mind? Did you raise them to say that the life of the family, where the faith is bred and nurtured, and where it's the family that brings them to the church. It's the family that brings them to the pastor to baptize them. It's the family that brings them to confirmation classes. It's the family that hopefully sits in the pew at their first communion. It's the family that's there, hopefully, in the church at the wedding. Like, this is in the family. So what's the context for teaching this in a congregation? Well, all sorts of them, but maybe it's just even sort of providing opportunities where these things are encouraged, or in Bible class talking about how important it is. I've never said that this second order instruction is not important in the congregation. I said, what's the function of preaching? Of preaching. What's the function of preaching? Now, I could be wrong on what the function of preaching is. And even if I am wrong about it, I hope that me saying it makes guys wrestle with it. If they wrestle with it and they decide I'm full of crap, and they're going to go on doing what they're doing, great. That's fine. Thank you for wrestling with it. And we'll move on, and we can part brothers then. And I mean, I'll part brothers with you anyway. I don't care if people disagree with me, but I just want to know, what's the function? Is education, or our education and proclamation, the same thing? Is it the same thing? If it's not,
yeah, I don't think I've thought about that specific question, but
if it's not, maybe we could think about that.
I wonder if there's, as you talk about like Melanchthon, maybe you know this, maybe you looked, but I always like the early church, and I kind of read the early church, but there's so many things that the early church just like knows and has not systematized. And sometimes it's so healthy. And I understand that has to come at some point. Right. But, there's certain things to where, to your point, you're saying, well, they didn't have those 3 uses. It doesn't mean they didn't use what we call the 3 uses, but they didn't have them, systematically broken up. And they
organized.
didn't say, at this point I was doing second, at this point I was doing third, or whatnot. They just kind of, preached poetically, or whatnot. But
more like Luther. That's more like what Luther does too.
Yeah. Where he's not necessarily thinking in those
preaching.
terms.
If you read, read Bondage of the Will, there's a lot of preaching in Bondage. It was preaching to Erasmus. But there's a lot of preaching in it. I don't Lutherans, when they're on their game, don't systematize.
Mm-hmm.
We don't create systems.
Yeah. That's
We
why I love, like, Bill Weinrich or
Yeah,
whatnot. Like, he was, one of my professors where he was just poetic. He just weaved
yeah.
things. And that's a
I
more
mean,
beautiful form.
we organize,
Hmm.
and we write dogmatic theologies, but even our systematic theologies are not typically called systematic theologies. It's Pieper's dogmatics, Mueller's dogmatics, right? Why? Because it's not a system. A system implies reliance on the one part over the other part, and it's got to fit together in a tight little thing. Now, Lutheranism done right is never going to fit together like Calvinism does.
Mm.
It's always going to maintain certain tensions that Calvinism isn't as comfortable with. It just is. It's our doctrine of the Lord's Supper, our doctrine of predestination and election. These things maintain tensions that a system can't maintain. A system has to fit together tightly. That doesn't mean that our dogmas, our theologies, can't be organized in a sufficient manner to kind of follow from one to the other. But it means that it's not sort of we're not reliant on sort of the absolute internal consistency of the logical propositions, because sometimes God, likes to churn over tables and temples and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a lot of paradox.
I don't love paradox.
Oh, yeah. Do you know, like, Chesterton, or like the way that he uses paradox?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
It's more like tension in Chesterton. A paradox implies that the two things can't actually logically ever coexist in the same realm.
Okay. The way Chesterton uses the word paradox, he would agree with, I think, what you're saying. Is
Yeah.
he'll always say, like, on the surface they seem like they're opposed,
Correct.
but then underneath there's actually something that binds them together. So
Correct.
it forces you into, like, a deeper truth. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an orthodoxy, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't like the word fully.
Yeah.
So he can call it. He's Roman Catholic. He can call it paradox all he wants.
Yeah. Yeah. At that time he wasn't, but he was.
Oh, wait, he wasn't?
Not yet. I think it was between orthodoxy and, I can't remember when he writes Everlasting Man. But it's always kind of funny because when you read it, you can already tell, like, he's thinking in those terms. And
he's Anglican at this point?
He's Anglican at that point. Yeah. It's not as if he's putting forward, it's not like you're going to read through orthodoxy and be like, oh, like, he's speaking in a way that's contrary to Lutheranism.
By Everlasting Man, it's pretty obvious. So
yeah, there's probably more there, especially in maybe the second half. I have to read that again. We had Dale Ahlquist on recently. He's the president of the Chesterton Society.
Yeah, that's neat.
He's like an embodiment of Chesterton.
That's
the way
funny.
He just kind of he's witty and
that's great.
Yeah, but the point being, like, the way that Chesterton kind of dances and paints things poetically, it's quite refreshing.
Yeah.
So a couple other maybe questions on 1517, then we can jump into our main thing of masculinity and fatherhood. Sure. Which I think you gestured towards, so I'm excited to get back into that. I always
gesture towards it. I just can't help myself.
Yeah. That was really good what you said there. I'm excited to kind of dissect that. But two other questions. One, 1517. Sure. What led to the choice of 1517 as a word?
As the name of the organization?
Yeah.
It was honestly, it had a lot to do with coming into the anniversary in 2017. The corporate name is New Reformation Publications, and which is what we were operating under prior to me coming on board, from like 2012 to 2015, and in 2015 sort of anticipating a lot of buzz around the 2017 500th anniversary. We rebranded, and originally to 1517 the Legacy Project, and then later to 1517.
Okay, yeah. So kind of leaning into that event that was coming up, and
and just, I mean, we've got really good people on sort of the branding and graphic design side, and just sort of making it cleaner.
That's one thing I appreciate.
Through the years,
yeah, we've looked a lot at your stuff as we were kind of building this, because the goal was, we were reverse engineering, long form video style was kind of blossoming, and we had some examples in other denominations, and we said, oh, we don't have it here. But the key was, if we were going to do it, and a lot of respect to the, the council and stuff at this church, because we said, if we're going to do this, like, we're going to have to put some money in up front, and we need to make sure that we have high quality. Like, we don't want to put this forward and just have it, you put an unnecessary barrier if you don't kind of have it, painted or branded correctly or good high quality. And that was one of the things I wanted to strive towards. But you guys do that very well.
Well, that's been from my early days with the organization. We've kind of on the business side leaned into the make it great model. Yeah. That we don't want to do anything that we can't do very, very well.
Is it MATA? make American. No, that doesn't work quite right.
Make one of my Swedish friend, when he introduced me on his Swedish podcast, he said, "This is Scott Keith. He runs 1517. They're trying to make Lutheranism great again."
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
like, oh, that's hilarious. I didn't say that, by the way, internet.
Right.
He did. No, it's just so from very early on. I mean, one of the first hires I made was for. Well, originally we hired him on the graphic design and photography side, but we then made him our director for sort of the art department, and for the branding department. And he and I had, even early on, about like the books that we were publishing, just long I mean, I made him read books on Lucas Cranach and Brand Luther and the whole nine yards, and sort of making sure everything we did kind of looked like us. So we kind of developed a look that was our look, and that it fit together and was good, at least, and very good from top to bottom. So this not only had to do with like the content of the books, but like the cover design of the books, the typesetting of the books, the font choice for the books, the way that everything was laid out on the inside, all of that, just so that when you spent $20 on one of our books and you got it in the mail, you got it and you thought, wow, okay, this looks like it's like I spent my money wisely here, including like sending handwritten note cards with some of those, and that type of thing, trying to do things well. And then that passed over to the video, our Video Academy side, which has been an evolution to the point where today our academies look like they're filmed somewhere in Hollywood, for Pete's sake, and just high quality. And we do our best. I mean, you don't always hit that mark, but we try.
Yeah, it's
same thing with our conferences too.
Yeah. Yeah, we're in the process. By the time this airs, we might be finished with it by now, but we're building out a proper website for the first time. And yeah, it's not easy, as you have to wrestle with all of these different things of color scheme, of what's the style.
I could tell you how much a good
theme.
website. God, it's not cheap.
No, it's not. No, we're building that out now, but we're gonna need that for.
We started out, we'd build out our own, and then we'd hire them out, and now it's all a whole thing. I mean, we have something like 10,000 unique pages on our website now.
Really?
It's a monster.
Yeah. One last question. So what led to, or was this kind of planned, or did it just kind of happen, or what? So you guys are, maybe Lutheran focus, but you guys are also pan. There's people on there that are certainly not LCMS.
Oh, sure.
You have some ELCA, some others, some Reformed. Is that right?
Yeah, I'd say
what kind of led to that, or what's
on the contributor list? We have the best Lutheran scholars from sort of all branches of Lutheranism, and the way that we're able to keep them, kind of in the same house without arguing is to go back to our original conversation, we keep them focused on that pointy end of the stick. Like we're not having them argue over cultural issues. We're not having them argue over ecclesiology. We're asking them, to write about the defense and proclamation of the gospel, and it works out that way. So under that, I mean, we do articles like on the Lord's Supper and whatnot, but those are usually going to be from your like straight down the middle confessional LCMS Lutheran guys. And we've got a very good editor who she's able to suss that out in people. So it also means that we can occasionally have like a Reformed Baptist write an article, or Reformed, or Law Gospel Anglican, or whatever. Our audience, I've been talking about that a lot this week. Our audience is, as we can gather it from surveys and from conference attendance and that type of thing, is about 50% Lutheran.
50?
Yeah. And it's about 50% other, kind of mixed up between.
Is that 50% like pan Lutheran or 50% LCMS?
Pan Lutheran. We don't actually ask that question, the second question.
Okay.
So we don't ask what brand of Lutheran are you. So I'm sure it's pan Lutheran. If I were to like put money in Vegas on it, I'd say it's on the Lutheran side, it's probably 40% LCMS.
10% other.
Yeah, 10% other. There's just, we're not big in the LCA, for some obvious reasons. We're very orthodox in our theology and that sort of, but there's a significant sort of following of confessional NALC, LCMC guys, Lutheran Brethren guys that really grab onto what we do. So, and a few in the ELCA. I mean, surprisingly in the ELCA, I know a lot of LCMS guys might be shocked to hear, but there there are congregations out there who sort of are just trying to keep their properties that are worth 5 million or 6 million, and being kind of like Jim Nestigan style confessional Lutherans in their little enclaves, and not really trying not to pay attention to their bishops and the craziness that goes on there.
I wonder what's going to happen with them. We were talking with Christian Einertson about this, but he was mentioning some of these congregations, to your point, where like they are not behind most of the things that have happened in the last 20 years, but then they've got a pretty faithful pastor, and then that he retires.
That's where
they've got to bring someone else in.
Yeah, that's
all
where
of
they
a sudden,
get in trouble.
Yeah,
I know of ELCA congregations that have tried to get around that by like before the guy retires, they'll hire on someone else to be like an associate pastor for 6 months, which the bishop, if they kind of have at least a good communication with their bishop, will usually let happen. And then that guy retires, and then the one guy's already there, so it's like a natural passing of the baton. But I think where they do get in trouble is this, the guy they have just poof retires, and then it's up to the bishop to kind of give them another pastor. And depending on your bishop, they could very intentionally give you somebody that's not, supportive of doesn't support the values that congregation's held for a long time. And that's where they get in trouble. But a lot of these churches stay in because the ELCA has been winning the lawsuits over getting properties.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
if they were to leave you're saying if they left the ELCA and they joined like the LCMS or something, they might lose a $5
They probably wouldn't join the
property.
LCMS, but let's say they join the LCMC or the NALC, which is where most of them go, to one of those two church bodies. They could lose their property.
Do you guys have internal dialogues, or maybe external, but maybe you guys try to avoid that external, but do you guys have like internal dialogues on things like women's ordination and stuff like that?
Among ourselves?
Yeah. Like when the cameras are off and the microphone's off.
I'd say all of our LCMS guys, which is going to be 98% of our staff, and
okay, yeah,
and also 98% of our like academics that are on payroll are against women's ordination.
But do you guys have like inner dialogue? Like, I'd just be interested to hear what that's like if you guys sit down with individuals that are for. Obviously, this is behind closed doors, right? But do you guys have good conversations on that? Or?
It's not that. This is going to sound stupid. It's not that interesting of a conversation to me, because I just think the New Testament's really clear on it.
Yeah, and
that anytime you try to support women's ordination, you're going to do something that I don't like to the text. You're going to make an excuse for it. You're going to say Paul was a cultural misogynist. We don't have to listen to him on this point. Or, you're going to do something that, in my opinion, just really undergirds the authority of the text of Scripture. And I don't like that. And I think that's a very, very dangerous proposition to do that. Where do you stop once you start doing that? And
how do you think, like, because to your point, there's people that are very good theologians in certain areas, and then they'll get to something like that and they'll be okay with women's ordination. Like, how do they, as good theologians?
It's cultural creep, I think.
Okay, but how do they not see that?
I don't know. Jim Nestigan used to say to me on quiet car rides that the Scandinavians have just always been more comfortable with their wives going to work than the Germans have. And so when it started happening in their churches to ordain women, they didn't really have a cultural, like, it didn't really shock them that all of a sudden they had a group of women that wanted to go get a professional degree and work professionally in the ministry.
But that wouldn't be like your pushback or mine, though. Wouldn't it be whether or not they can have professional? It would be, whether or not you can read the text in a certain way.
Yeah, my pushback wouldn't be that I would not say a woman is not capable of understanding the text of Scripture. No, I would not say that. No, but I think in the LCMS, I think he has a bit of a point that, especially when this started happening, in the 70s, that there was the LCMS was in itself more culturally conservative too, and so I think that was part of it. The average LCMS layperson in the 70s, was it a scriptural argument for them or not? I don't know. I was a baby. So at the end of the day, how do they not see it in the Scriptures? I don't know, maybe it just wasn't a priority for them. I know that for a fact. Like, I came up under Rod Rosenblatt and to some degree John Montgomery, and so like the authority of Scripture arguments are always like ringing in my head. But I've hung out with enough of these, on the whole, very orthodox, former ELCA seminary professors, and it's just they just it, it's just not something that they thought about as much as we did. I mean, I'm not trying to make excuses. I'm just trying to say, like, it just wasn't foremost of mind for them.
So they don't even wrestle with it so much. You're saying it's just kind of.
And when they do, they're not sort of brought up with the same categories to wrestle with it categorically in the same way, right? Like, I'll give you, for instance, some of my ELCA friends will sometimes make a distinction between inerrancy and infallibility of the Scriptures, right? Where we fall on the inerrancy side, I fall on the inerrancy side. And they'll often fall on the infallibility side, which gives them sort of a way to say that the Scriptures are always authoritative in sort of taught doctrine, but not necessarily in other things.
It's like sexuality or
geography, whatever,
Okay.
Timelines of creation and that type of thing. Like, stuff that just doesn't. I have no problem with believing that the geography in Scripture is probably correct, and that even if modern sort of archaeology thinks it's not, eventually it'll probably come around and they'll go 20 years later, oh, look at that, the Bible was right. I get that doesn't bother me at all. I think that's entirely possible, and in fact usually what happens. But they kind of have this category, and it's to some degree we're all a result of how we were educated on this stuff too. You can break out of that. I think to some degree I did, but it takes an intentional effort to do that. And most people don't make the intentional effort because they don't even realize that they should or have to. You have to run into somebody else that really like shakes you to make you go, oh gosh, maybe I should look into that the other way. And that just doesn't happen for most people.
You see 15, 17 as kind of an opportunity for that? Like, because your audience is, maybe 50% non-Lutheran, or maybe 60% non-LCMS, like, is that an opportunity for them to for those that are coming from those other backgrounds that have these different categories, have been maybe educated in certain paradigms and things like that? Like, is 15, 17 an opportunity, since you have a big audience, to kind of have them run into those arguments for the first time?
I mean, sometimes when again, we don't respond, but sometimes when we're getting a lot of flack from like within the LCMS, I'll think to myself, this isn't the first time I've said it on the old interwebs. Sometimes I wish y'all just say thank you for the thousands of people we've sent into your pews, and then wrestle with the rest of it, privately with me via email, or ask me to come out and sit down and have a beer with you and discuss the issues, because I'd happily do that if I possibly can. But otherwise, the number of people that we've, in an initially low-risk environment, convinced that Lutheran theology is the correct scriptural theology, and then they themselves have sought out Orthodox LCMS churches where they can live out that theology in their day-to-day lives and in the life of the church, is astonishing. Like, I could send you the emails. It's a lot. And this is sort of the gospel to those who have never heard the gospel outside the church, and the gospel to those who don't hear the gospel on a regular basis inside their church, right? Once they hear it, they want more of it. And where do you send them? Well, we typically send them to good Orthodox LCMS churches, if there's one anywhere near them. If there's not, we might look for a good law gospel Anglican church and help them find that, or whatever, or just kind of give them the tools to ask the right questions when they go into a church.
Do you have, I'm always calibrating this list. I wonder if you have one, and you can just punt on this one too, but because I'm not necessarily asking you on behalf of 1517, but just personally, like, if you took like the LCMS, what would you say, what would be the denominations that you think are the closest to the LCMS, theologically speaking?
If you take out women's ordination, the NALC is pretty close. In fact, it's public that Matt Harrison has sat down at a table many times with NALC officials and scholars to try to work out some sort of something. I think they always get stuck on women's ordination, and probably rightly so. But I know this because Jim Nestigan went to several of them and would tell me about them when he would go. I'd say if you come across like a good law gospel Orthodox Anglican Episcopal Church, you're probably going to be in really good shape.
Is there a bit? I mean, they're kind of like the Catholic Church, right? Like there's a huge spectrum within Anglicanism.
Fair to say huge spectrum, but very much leaning on the way more liberal side on the whole. You walk into your average Episcopal church and it's going to be closer to ELCA than it is to anything else. So you have to search, but there is a movement. There is a movement in there. Sans, specific issues on the sacraments, the OPC.
What's the OPC?
Orthodox Presbyterian Church.
How close are they to like Presbyterian PCA?
Oh, I think they're kind of far from it a little bit. Yeah, because they're sort of the LCMS of the Presbyterian world.
Okay.
They're kind of seen as the like fundamentalist sort of, backwaters conservative folk. I say that in a good way. In a good way, internet. But yeah, I mean, in fact, at our little church in Big Bear, a good number of the people that worship with us now came from an OPC church that closed.
Okay.
In our area.
So, I don't know much about the OPC. I'll have to look into them.
Yeah.
I know like PCA through Timothy Keller.
Yeah.
So I know a little about the PCA, and then I know PC USA is like they're one and the same of
OPC is
liberal
is
theology.
Closer to us.
Okay.
Than the other. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Well, should we do masculinity?
Sure, man.
All right. So if we're thinking of masculinity, if we're thinking of fatherhood, where do we start? Where do you want to start? What's kind of a good starting point to kind of wrap our minds around this? Because we can go down a lot of different little rabbit holes as we go. But maybe let me ask it this way. What's the current day struggle for a man my age, 33, your age, 38? Is that how old you are? Living.
God bless you.
Yeah.
52.
52. So for a 33-year-old man, Bennett, 24? 25.
Like, I'm 25, man.
Yeah. What kind of struggles do we just naturally have that we don't even recognize we have because we're just, frogs in the water? What are the attacks on our masculinity?
That's funny. I mean, frogs and can I go with the results a little bit now?
Yeah,
I mean, the average, what's your name? The average dude Bennett's age has, something like 20% less testosterone than probably even I have.
I do have to vouch for Bennett as a college goalie. I've seen this boy in action.
Average.
I just
want to obviously above average specimen, and so I'm not talking about him specifically.
Yeah, especially when he has his mustache in play. Then his testosterone is almost too much for the recording studio.
But their grip strength is, I wrote an article for Jaguar a long time ago that said, well, and this was even 10 years ago, that I think it was titled something like "Your girlfriend is stronger than you are," because. They were it was a few colleges were like research college universities were measuring grip strength in men and women between, I think, the ages of 18 and 24. And in the aggregate, the girls that came in had greater grip strength than the guys.
No way.
Yeah. Huh. Men in this country are at a jobless rate that rivals that of the Great Depression. The only reason we don't notice it is because 70% of women of working age have jobs, while only something like 38% of men do.
No way.
Yeah. The marriage rate is at an all-time low. The fertility rate is at an all-time low. Men between your age and his age, sperm count is lower than it's ever been in recorded history of keeping track of such things.
Wow.
It's just, there's lots of challenges. The rates of daily, multiple times daily use of pornography is through the roof. The rates of sexual encounters, like when I was growing up, like if you didn't know 5 girls that got pregnant in high school, you probably weren't going to high school. Now this is like almost not a thing because not only are people having less sex outside of marriage, people that age are having less sex even when they get married. I mean, you could just keep going on and on and on with this. It's just not a great time for men and boys. I mean, boys struggle in school at a rate that's like 4 times what girls do. They have more behavioral problems. They have more diagnosed behavioral disorders, and just on and on and on.
Wow. So, no, those are staggering statistics.
Yeah. It's but I try to be careful. I try to say, I'm with the scriptures on this. There's nothing new under the sun. We've had to encounter this somewhere before in human history. I'm sure we haven't encountered it in my lifetime, which makes it, or in my father's lifetime or my grandfather's lifetime, which makes it a little scary.
Yeah.
But it's leading to population decline, and that population decline is going to smack us in the face sooner rather than later, I think. But I think people worry about all sorts of stuff that's probably going to work itself out. And I'm not sure about this one. This one seems to have like some critical things that hang on to it that could make things pretty bad.
So what do you think are some of the things that lead to it, to all those statistics you're putting forward?
When I first wrote Being Dad, which is almost 10 years now, I think it came out in 2015. And I used to go around and trot myself all over the country doing the little talks trying to sell the book. I used to point to media a lot. This was even back when people were still maybe had a cable subscription and watched TV. And as far back as I can think, for the most part, men have been denigrated in the media, on sitcoms and TV shows in general. And you've sort of seen this sort of cultural creep where men are treated men are presented, let's say, as either gay, like out and out gay, or straight, but bumbling idiots, who can't handle their life, who, if they are married, definitely are not the heads of their household, definitely are not the smart ones in their household, definitely aren't the ones that make any decisions in their household or capable of making decisions in their household. In the same time, you've had this big sort of cultural push for girls and women to become more and more competent, which, even if you don't take a stand on whether or not that's good or bad, when that's done as she needs to be competent and he doesn't need to be competent, you've just sort of flipped the tables of what the feminist movement is fighting against here. Well, you've always told women they can't be competent, and so now they can be. Okay, if that's in tandem with trying to raise boys to be good, competent, contributing members of society, maybe that's fine, and maybe it's neutral. But when we've done it as an either or, like it was either or leaning on the guy's side, and now it's either or leaning on the girl's side, and you're leaving boys completely behind, and you seem to be okay with it because of some retributive sort of principle or something like that. It's tragic, and it's going to have massive consequences, or is having massive consequences at least for society. I think we see it in the church too. Like, the LCMS church is, I think, demographically the oldest church in the country.
Is it really?
I think so.
Wow.
Yeah, just by average age of attendee. And this is the question I asked of the guys in Wisconsin last week. Like, have we raised our children to believe that it's important to make families, get married, get a job, get married, and have babies? For multiple reasons, but one of those reasons is because the most sort of effective way to pass on the faith from generation to generation is to, whenever possible, have children and to raise them in the faith. Like, if you don't do that, you're down to just straight evangelism, which is, I always say, people like, make sure you tell people that you still have to evangelize. I'm like, I run 15-17. What are you talking about? Of course, I think you have to evangelize.
Yeah, they're not an either or.
I'm like, give me a break. But now, just even maintaining is all evangelism, and doesn't happen through the natural mechanism that has happened for thousands of years, which is having babies, baptizing them, and raising them in the faith, and then expecting that cycle to literally expecting that cycle to return, having the expectation that your children will not just be raised in the faith, but having the expectation that they will stay in the faith. And that they will get married, and that they will raise their children in the faith, and that you'll have little grandchildren that you can help raise in the faith, and that cycle repeats. We don't have that expectation anymore. The number of parents I talk to that are afraid to have expectations for their grown children blows me away.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
I gave a talk at our conference in Arkansas in 2020. I'm not going to get it exactly right, where I said, I expect that my grown children will all get married fairly young, that they'll all give me grandchildren. In fact, I expect at least 9 grandchildren, because I feel like it's fair. I had 3 kids. I have 3 kids. They should all have at least 3 kids. That gets me to 9, that they all live within 3 miles of me
Mhm.
and that we all attend the same church.
Mhm.
And I got down from the thing, and the number of people that came up to me and said, "I can't believe you'd say that. What if your
Mm.
kids hear you?" I'm like, "What do you mean? What if they're here? Of course they heard me. Do you think it's the first time they've heard this?" Absolutely, it's not.
Yeah, it staggers me, like, to that point, just use maybe dating as an example. But, we bought onto this idea, and I hear people say it all the time where it's like, okay, my daughter's in like, sophomore in high school or something like that. And you'll hear parents like, yeah, she's dating this guy, and
I
I don't
hate
know. And
that.
it's like,
I hate that so
well, you're
much.
you're the parent, and we were talking with a guy we've had on twice who I very much respect, has shown with his fruits that he's raised his kids very well. And he's like, yeah, when my daughter, who's in, I think maybe like late high school or something like that, and she's like, yeah, she doesn't date, but she can go through a courting process. In other words, the guy can come over and meet the family, and like he absolutely needs my blessing as the father if they're going to, be spending time together and all
Yeah.
of this stuff. And that's pretty normal historically. It's not normal now, but what a
Yeah.
weird mindset we have of like, well, I don't know, my freshman in high school, like she wants to date this guy. Well, who am I to get?
I can't stand him, but what am I gonna do?
Yeah.
Like, what
As
are
if
you
that
gonna
wasn't the
do?
prime reason God puts you into the
Yeah,
vocation you're in, is to
I
make sure you protect your daughter whose frontal cortex is not even close to being fully formed.
I
Like, what a weird
even
mentality.
if her frontal cortex is 110% formed, she's still my daughter.
Yeah.
And whether she lives in my house or not, she's still my daughter.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like am I ever going to believe that I don't have the right or ability to speak to my children about what I think is right and wrong and what I expect of them as their father?
Hmm.
Yeah, that's absolutely not. I mean, I am going to. That's it's part of the reason why you have kids. Like, do you have kids because you think you don't want to hand down anything that is you? I don't understand that. You
Hmm.
have kids to hand down you,
Hmm.
right? At least you and your wife,
Hmm.
into the next generation. And a giant part of handing down who you and your wife are, hopefully, is your faith.
Yeah.
And it ought to be. If it's not, boy, it's time for a reevaluation process about why and how you're raising children. They're put into your life not just to grow into contributing members of society, which they are, but to grow into the faith.
Hmm.
And that's of utmost importance. When my kids were young enough to date, I never used official language like courting.
Hmm.
But I did say, listen, dating is dangerous. I'm gonna quote one of my friends. I don't ever want you to have to get into the ring with sex, because sex is gonna win.
Hmm.
Like, if you ever get yourself in the situation where you're totally unsupervised and your hormones are just going 100 miles an hour, and you have every opportunity to have sex, you're gonna have sex.
Mhm.
This is what, and I don't want you to be put in that situation, right? And I'd tell my boys, I'd say, listen, I want you to think about any time you are quote unquote dating a girl, that she's probably not going to be your wife someday, and that she's going to be somebody else's wife someday, and that you wouldn't want to do anything to her that you wouldn't want some dude you don't know doing to your future wife.
Hmm.
And that's my boys will both tell me, yeah, man, that was like ding 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 in my head anytime I held a girl's hand. I'm like, yeah, I'm glad it was.
Yeah.
Because it's important. I don't, and so we protected from that. It didn't mean that they didn't, I guess, date, but it did mean that their dating was like them going over to that house for dinner, or her coming over to our house for dinner, or getting dropped off at a movie and getting picked up from a movie, and knowing them.
Hmm.
Like, dating somebody I didn't, or my wife didn't know or approve of. Oh my Lord, that just give me a break.
Hmm.
We could protect against that a little bit. I mean, by the time my kids were in high school, they were homeschooling, and so it's a little easier. It's probably a lot harder if your kids are going to school or to public school to
Hmm.
monitor what's happening whilst at school. And I get the challenge. That's why I never say, hey, only do the courting. Well, you have to actually do for you what works in your sort of structure.
Hmm.
But no matter what you do, please think about the categories. Like, please don't leave it to chance.
Hmm.
You weren't giving these children to like leave it to chance.
Hmm.
You weren't giving them to leave anything to chance, really.
Yeah. Inaction is going to be inaction in the wrong direction.
Yeah, that's right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you set the stage? Because I've heard some people talk about this, and it makes sense. My oldest is 5, so it makes sense hypothetically because we have not reached any of these stages.
My
But
oldest is almost 30.
oh,
So,
okay, yeah.
yeah.
But just setting the stage so that their expectations are such that they understand that mom and dad have a hands-on role into these different areas of life that are important, right? So they don't
Yeah.
have this kind of mindset of hyper individuality by the time they're reaching
Mhm.
middle school and high school. I mean, goodness, we've got people in this church that say, well, my eighth grader doesn't want to come to church, so they don't come to church with us.
Oh,
We're
for
hoping
Pete's
they change
sake.
their mind. And it's like, goodness gracious. But that's a certain mentality where it's like hyper individual. The
If they don't
child
want to
is
go to the bathroom or take a
right.
shower or wipe their butt, is
Yeah.
that left to them too?
It is insanity, but it's an insanity that's taken root in our culture and it's influenced our Christian households, as you very much know. But yeah, so how do you kind of set that so that by the time they're a senior in high school, there's certain expectations that dad loves me, mom knows me, they've got certain wisdom bestowed upon
Mhm.
God in these areas, and I respect and I listen. Not that they're going to be 100% for it all the time, but where it's not a shock for them.
Yeah. So listen, I you gotta be careful in these conversations because you could really give off the implication that you did everything right.
Hmm.
Right. And I did not do everything right.
Hmm.
Like, and I love my children and I'm very proud of my children, but I don't love every decision that they've made as an adult either.
My parents would probably say the same thing.
What's that?
My parents would probably
Right.
say the same thing.
I would
yeah.
say that on the whole, I see my children and my grandchildren in church every Sunday when I'm home,
Mhm.
and I feel like that's a real win. On the whole, my kids all are married and have jobs and are doing their best to sort of um, make their way, oftentimes with our help, sometimes not. So, but at the same time, a couple of my children have had some pretty big failures too, and that's just. But it's not. They weren't failures because we were ever afraid to have input into their life.
Mhm.
And so that's my caveat. Okay.
Mhm.
Now assertions. It's very important, I think, to never be afraid to have conversations with your children about anything you think you need to have a conversation about. From the get-go. I always tell people that are raising young kids, do your best to speak to them like shorter adults. Don't speak to them like they're kids who can't understand real words, real phrases, real expectations, real names of people. Do your best to just talk to them like they're adults that are shorter than you and let them catch up, because they will catch up, right? If you sort of bring down the expectations of even their ability to process language and communicate with you, that it'll stay down for longer than it needs to. If you just talk to them straight out, like, hey, go get me this and this off the counter and bring it back to me at 4 years old, 3 years old, whatever, they'll learn to do it, right? That sets the expectation that you can talk to them like they're a person and not like they're, some other category of thing that we call a child that you need to use kid gloves on and not approach with real conversations. If in my experience, what I've seen is with people that do that, by the time these kids get to junior high and high school, they're still treating them with kid gloves.
Mm-hmm.
You don't feel like you can talk to them about their boyfriend or girlfriend because you've never talked to them about getting hair on their pubes, because that was a conversation, or you've never talked to them about, really specifically about sex and about when sex is wonderful and when sex is not appropriate at all. And you've maybe never even said the word. You've used euphemisms when you had the talk, so that by the time they're maybe having sex, you still can't say the word. Right. Or you're so afraid that of having the conversation that you don't have the conversation. You just take them and put them on birth control. It's something like, it's a huge percentage of young girls are on birth control by 13.
Wow.
And stay on it for their life.
And they're coming out. I've appreciated. There's been a lot of even just secular,
and
doctors
how
and stuff
bad
that are like,
is.
hey, this is actually like absolute poison to women.
Really bad.
Yeah. No matter what your view on like sex is, it's just that is absolutely terrible.
There's a lot of elite athletes that won't do it because that research came into the field of athletic performance first. So there's a lot of elite college athletes that get off of birth control, not because they have some sort of big Christian standard on sex, because it makes them slower. But So have those conversations. I mean, my biggest advice to parents, this on the practical side to parents, I just always say, you got to talk to your kids about anything and everything. And you have to talk to them like they're real people that you respect enough to have a real conversation with them.
Mm.
I think once you've done that, they at least know that you respect them because you've never talked to them like they couldn't handle what you had to say. I think that's really important. And I think it's missing quite a bit.
Yeah, I think that sets the stage too. I need to get back off. I've been off X for forever, Twitter forever, and I got on after Trump got shot, and because it was just everything was so
I managed
moving
to
fast.
not, so I just
Good
have
for you.
people tell me what's going on.
Yeah, I've been on since then, and I think it's time for me to get back off because it's kind of a waste of time. But I was on recently. It was one of the last 2 days, and kind of interesting. But there was a little kind of visual. It was kind of a graph, and it showed how people spent their waking hours, and it went back from like it might have been 1935 or 45 or something through modern day. And the first switch was maybe in the 60s or 70s for the top one. So it was like family, friends, maybe coworkers, church, a bar or restaurant, something like that. And it went down, and you saw the first switch was from family to friends. And that probably happened because people started having kids later. So there was this big, 20s period where they're just hanging out with friends all of the time. And then that carries forward and becomes kind of there's nothing wrong with hanging out with friends, but it becomes maybe something that was so important in your 20s. So in your 30s, you're like, well, Tuesday I got to play softball. Thursday I've got to do this. And it's time.
And eventually you're having Friendsgiving instead of Thanksgiving.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there was that switch. And then, family just kind of keeps moving down. It started with like close to 30%, and now it's getting close to 20%. A bar, all these other kind of things go up. Church is going down. And then all of a sudden it's like 2000. And all of a sudden this new little graph shows up, and it's internet, which starts off, 1%, 2% as the internet comes up. And all of a sudden everything changes drastically come like 2005, 2010.
Probably 2007 when you have it in your pocket.
Yeah. That might have been right about that time. And all of a sudden it just goes from like the last one to the top one and ends up being something like 60, 70%. And by the end of this, family has gone down to like 4.1%. It's gone from 30 to 4%.
Probably friends have gone down quite a bit too.
Friends, everything gets damaged by the internet. But I mean, just the move from family being, about a third of your waking hours you're spending with family down to less than 5%.
Yeah.
So, to tackle on what you're talking about, it's like, hey, you have to be able to have real conversations.
Yep.
And then if you have this family time, then you have tons of opportunities once you've established that to have these ongoing conversations, to, break down barriers, to have these dialogues. But the combination of us being afraid to talk about things and then only having 5% of our life to even have that opportunity, like kids are not being parented at that point. Kids are just they're just going to be drifts in society.
I've heard parents say like, well, she's on her phone all the time, but what are you going to do? And I'm like, tell her to put the damn phone down. Like I don't
smash it with a hammer.
This doesn't seem, why does this not seem difficult to me? Like, I don't understand it.
And if you understand the consequences, like what it's doing to, just the rise in depression and anxiety and their inability to hold relationships and all of this stuff. It's like if you just, it wouldn't take long. It'd take 10 minutes of research. But if you knew those results, then you would understand like the most important thing you could do right now is to smash that phone and take it away.
Did you read Jonathan Haidt's? I think it's Anxious Generation.
I haven't read it yet, but I've watched some interviews with him.
Yeah, I read it.
How about tell me more about this?
I would, if upon reading that, I would recommend everybody that has like an 8-year-old daughter or something like that who's about to be 10, 12, whatever, read that book and then commit themselves to never getting their daughter a smartphone until they're like 18. Because the data he puts in there about how damaging it is specifically to young girls and teenage girls is shocking. It's not great for boys either, but boys seem to have a more complicated relationship with like online gaming than the social media. The social media really has impacted like anxiety and depression in teenage girls. Hugely. The online gaming for guys, it basically produces a laziness that kind of feeds into the no job thing. That and porn. Like if you're not going to get your boy a smartphone, it's going to be because they're gonna spend a decent part of their life trying to crack that parental code that keeps from going on a porn site. And the girls is because of social media.
Yeah. That I was watching the interview on trigonometry or something like that. It's not actually. It sounds something close to that, but they're What's that? Those British guys. Yeah. You know what it's called? They're really good. I've kind of I've watched them a little bit recently because they're, way better at this than I am. And I'm trying, trying to reverse engineer.
I commend you for doing that. I should maybe listen to more podcasts that are better at podcasting than me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always humbling when you listen. You're like, man, these guys are good. But he like, for instance, Jonathan Haidt was on there and I'm watching that. I'm like, man, this might be the most, non like theological thing I've watched in the last decade. That is so important. Like he's got his finger on, he's like, here's all of these issues. And there's plugging like RFK Jr. and like the health. And I want to ask you about that, food and stuff like that. But outside of that, like he's got his finger on, I think, the most serious issue that's devastating our society and our kids.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to remember all, I get the authors all confused, but the couple of books that I read in the past year or so that really like shook my world were going to be I think it's called Anxious Society, Jonathan Haidt, Anxious Society. Another one is called What to Expect When No One is Expecting. It's talking about the sort of decline in the fertility rate. That one will blow your mind. Men Without Work. Oh my Lord. What's the one on that just came out on, another one on parenting that I'll remember it at some point, but just there are lots of books like that have Sexual State. That one, it can really, I told the guys in Wisconsin last week, I'm like, if you're already a little depressed, don't take any of these book suggestions. But if you sort of feel like you can handle a little bit of depression being thrown your way, I've got some recommendations for you. So
let's dive
Family Unfriendly. That's the other one. Oh boy.
Is that the one you were just referencing?
Yeah, I was trying to. Yeah.
Yeah. Family Unfriendly.
Yeah. That one. Ooh, boy. So
let's unpack some of those ideas, but let's take a quick break real quick.
Sure.
All right. Bennett says, we're back.
All right.
So let's dive into some of those. You kind of referenced a couple different books. We talked about, kind of parenting, relationships, having, intentionality, right? And what you're doing. But what other things do you see, maybe with masculinity, or if you want to talk more about, the family, but some of these kind of glaring issues that need to be addressed?
I mean, one of the things I've been on lately in some of my talks is just sort of, if you look at Genesis 1 and 2, as God sort of, you get the first command, do not eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the center of the garden. So you get that one big sort of theological, don't do this command. And then after that, the three commands that he gives them are civil commands. And it's basically to Adam, he says, get a job. To both of them, he says, get married. And to both of them, he says, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And that we don't do a lot. I mean, especially the younger generation right now, they're just not doing a lot of that. The guys, like I said, their work rate's at the level of the Great Depression. They're not getting jobs. Marriage is happening less and less, and later they're not getting married. Fertility rate is, if you take out immigration in middle class America, is like at 1.6%, which is the same as China post the one-child policy.
Wow.
Those things aren't happening. And so,
like a 1.6 replacement?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you have not only like the deleterious effects that'll have on society, but again, like I said, this also means that you're not sort of making new little Christians, which is what God desires, it seems like, and so
do you think, if I can just kind of lean into that one, do you think that the Lutheran Church not taking a stance on like birth control and vasectomies, do you think that that's
you're really
an issue?
You're going to get me in trouble here, buddy.
That's what we're here for, right? What I mean by
I don't know if the Lutheran Church not taking a stance on it is a big deal, but I think that, it probably is. I mean, most people probably look to their, I'm not trying to denigrate pastors here, look to their pastor more to tell them what to do or what's right or wrong than I do. And so you would know that better than me. I've never been a pastor of a congregation, so you'd have a better insight on, the life of the parishioner when it comes to what sway do you have over, what they do or don't do in their life. I don't know that.
I guess I'm thinking, so like I've got a lot of good Catholic friends, you know, and so we'll talk about this, and they're good Catholic friends in that there's kind of a good spectrum of, most of them when we were buddies in like college, they took it about as seriously as most college kids do, and they've grown in, on kind of different tracks as far as how seriously they take it. And I probably have a couple data points of, one that looks and says, hey, the Catholic Church says it's a mortal sin for me to have a vasectomy. So
Yeah.
he's ruled that off, right? So
Yeah.
he says, I'm not going to do that. I've got another friend that's like, yeah, I hear that, but he kind of wrestles with it. And he's like, well, we're going to kind of postpone kids for right now. They've got three,
Yeah.
so it's not, so there's a spectrum. Either way, they're all wrestling with it, whatever conclusion. To whereas when I talk with people in the Lutheran church, and we've had two people on in the past that have kind of spoken about this as an issue. And I've had dialogue with people after the fact, but that was kind of the first time that they even ever wrestled with the issue. So, and some people were way past the age. I've told you we've had people before that have reversed their vasectomies and have told me about that. But, just the idea that the way that we've at least articulated it, whether or not each individual pastor is doing what they're doing, but maybe I don't want to say as a synod, but most Lutherans kind of growing up in the last 50 years have never even thought that it was an issue.
Yeah,
I've
never even thought about it, to be honest with you, in terms of whether or not it was right or wrong or a sin or not. So I can even say that with birth control, I think we should have understood earlier that what the end result has been is that we've taught Christians to live their life the same as non-Christians. And one of the big parts of that is to start treating marriage and children like they're a choice. And once that's a choice, you get into the discussion, is it pro-life or pro-choice? And then once the pro-choice discussion has evolved, it's like, well, is it pro-life or I want to kill my baby whenever? And it's the choice conversation goes from choice to outright, I get to do whatever I want to do and you can't tell me I can't. And then we sort of tandem with that is the data is pretty clear on this, that most Christians don't think differently on these issues than non-Christians do on the whole, but kind of by the numbers, until you get to like really orthodox communities of Christians, which is where there's like some hope for reproduction. Even like it's really only Orthodox religious communities that are still having children. Now, the funny thing about the LCMS is that in most situations, we would be considered part of that Orthodox religious community, but on this, we're not. And that's kind of weird. I regret that. I regret my former views on birth control and vasectomies. And I will say this, I talked to my son about this quite a bit on a lot of things. There's just a lot more information available today about what's going on that I didn't even really know about. Like when my wife and I were first discussing whether or not she should go on birth control, I don't think either one of us were aware of what the birth control pill actually does as far as ejecting a fertilized egg. I think if we would have known that, the answer would have been absolutely clear. No, we didn't know that. And when we first got married, it's not like I had Google in my pocket. I don't know how I would have found that out other than us asking the specific gynecologist or doctor who was doing the prescribing, what's going on here. And I'm not even sure they would have known the answer. And so that's a little weird. Like we know that now, and maybe the Catholic Church always knew that, and that's why this is such a big sin, and I didn't. But I'm not using that as an excuse. I think if I would have thought through that kind of more robustly in my youth, some of that would have probably occurred to me.
Well, I think that's normal. I mean, I've heard one of my professors, Peter Scare, was big on this, and he would mention, he'd be like, yeah, for because he had 3 kids, and he's like, we just kind of did the normal thing and we never thought about it and none of this information was there. And he's kind of saying the same thing as you, or he's like, I regret the stance that I had previously, particularly at the time when we were having children. And now all of this kind of information, and now, his eyes have been open to it and now he speaks about it. But we did just kind of culturally speaking, we didn't know. And some of that was malicious from some people, not within our synod, I'm saying, but they changed the definition of what conception meant, and it used to mean what we think of when like sperm hits egg, and they changed it to implantation. I've always thought
about abortion is that life begins at conception, and I mean I've thought that since my teens, and I just didn't put it together, the rest of it together. That makes any sense. I didn't sort of like organically chase down the rest of the positions to sort of come to what probably is the logical conclusion about them all. I did kind of live, once we were married especially, like once we were married, and I did kind of fall into the how many kids you have as a choice model and all of that kind of thing. And to some degree, there's no getting around that. Like you can You can just not have sex for a period of time and, avoid your wife getting pregnant and that type of thing. But as I think about it now, like, the problem is it's not a very far leap from it's a choice how many kids my wife and I have and when we have kids to it's just a choice. Like even after conception, it's just a choice. And it's not just a choice, it's a person.
Yeah.
A child of God.
Yeah.
That's not a choice. That's something much more than that.
And where we've kind of landed, and this is where we're lucky, right? Just generationally speaking, to where these things have been, brought up.
More
and,
information.
Yeah.
My son has way more information regarding even how to raise his kids and whether or not to get them vaccinated and everything than I ever had.
Yeah.
We just, some of that, I'd say back in the day, you just kind of went through the motions. My son's like your age almost. And it's just like when we just, I didn't know.
Yeah. And a lot of that stuff's continuing to be brought up to light. By the way, if you're watching this on YouTube, at this point, I think the word abortion has been said, the word vasectomy, and now the word vaccination. So if you want to scroll down and learn more about those, there's probably a disclaimer at the bottom of our video.
Really?
That will tell you the truth, the
Seriously,
fact-checked
that's
truth.
Thing?
Oh my goodness,
I don't know
yeah.
anything. I'm such a Luddite.
They're good at it too. They scroll. I mean, I don't know. I think they get the whole dialogue.
Wow.
Like they take the transcript, run it through their
I'm sure
algorithms.
it's AI doing it, right?
Yeah, so we'll get. If we keep on this, we can maybe break the record for how many.
On YouTube, I'm kind of proud.
They don't officially flag you, but they put this little. Well, two things. They put this little disclaimer at the bottom, and we notice that whenever there's a disclaimer there, we also get less views. So, which is just coincidence. Did we get one taken off at one point? If you have. Okay. Yeah. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. All right.
So as 15, 17 enters more and more into YouTube, you got to wrestle with those things. Yeah. We don't have those issues on our podcast platform. It doesn't really affect there. Facilitating. Oh, yeah.
See, we wouldn't have.
Well,
we wouldn't
if
do
it picked
that.
Up, we're gonna have another disclaimer now.
Yeah, we wouldn't do that show, so we probably wouldn't get pulled down for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe your business plan is not too bad. You're kind of.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I would bet you're going to grow faster because you do those shows. I mean, people want to hear some of this stuff.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Oh goodness, So kind of where we're at right now with the whole thing, because we've got 3 and growing, but we kind of say, okay, if at any point we're going to say we don't want kids for this period of time or whatever, certainly we're not doing birth control or anything like that. NFP would be the only option, but we have to formulate an argument that we think we can take before God as to why, and that's kind of a good way for us to say, because, we've had 2 C-sections. It was C-section, VBAC after 2, which was, we had to kind of push for that, but there could come a point where, especially once you hit like 4 C, like there's times where health is not just moderate, but a serious concern.
I've never really said this publicly, or maybe I have, I don't know. I don't think so. Our first one, Caleb, was a C-section. And our second one, Joshua, was a VBAC. And my wife hemorrhaged after Joshua. And there was a small surgery, basically in the birth. They were able to do it in the birthing room. I was a very, not even nearly, completely like sexually inexperienced when I got married. And I didn't understand a lot of, when my wife was bleeding profusely after Joshua, I didn't know if that was normal, if it was not normal. I didn't, even as they're like sewing her up, I had heard of women having to get sewed up after birth. So I had no clue, other than they seemed pretty intense. Like they seemed like they really needed to get this taken care of, right? That scared me quite a bit. Then with my daughter Autumn, my wife, it was another VBAC. My wife hemorrhaged so bad that she passed out, and they rushed her to the operating room. And I'm sitting there with my beautiful little daughter in my arms, and I don't know where my wife is.
Jeez, yeah.
And I think about it today, and it just freaking kills me. And I was afraid. I was afraid. It didn't help that we were broke, and that we lived in a 900 square foot house with 3 kids, and I didn't really see a means of getting a bigger house. I couldn't even afford a car that could fit 4 kids, and so I can honestly say that my decision to get a vasectomy was completely fear.
Mm.
It was fear based. And I told you before the show, I don't live my life with a lot of regret, but I honestly regret getting a vasectomy, just
Mhm.
top to bottom, regret it. Health, it's caused health issues for me. It's I when my daughter was like 6 or 7, we really wanted to have another kid, badly,
Mhm.
and really couldn't afford the surgery to reverse things, and you know it, I don't that's one of the reasons I typically don't make decisions out of fear anymore.
Mhm.
um it's just it's not it's not the state of mind or the category under which you should be making decisions.
Mm.
There's a trust that comes with being secure in Christ, that you should be able to make a lot of your decisions out of at least a sense that the ultimate hope is already taken care of,
Mhm.
and that everything else, he's also looking out for.
Mhm. Yeah, that's
It
well
doesn't
said.
mean you make bad decisions intentionally, or decisions that are gonna kill your wife intentionally. Like, if we would have had another one, my wife would have had to have a C-section. I mean,
Mhm.
she couldn't have another one VBAC.
Yeah.
But I think she would have been willing to do that, and it's been something that we should have thought through more.
Mm. Yeah. Well, I commend you for, being able to share that. And, I think for everyone, they've got those areas in their life where they can look back and say, yeah, made it out of fear and
Oh yeah,
whatnot. And to your point about, what was it not the first article, the first, hence the importance of this understanding of, the proclamation of both forgiveness and healing and restoration,
yeah,
through what Christ has done, because we all have these different things in our life where we look back and we go, yeah, circumstances were tough and made this decision and whatnot.
yeah,
And, yeah.
yeah. I think we would have ended up with a lot more kids.
Yeah.
So, and I would have loved that.
Mm-hmm. Um, let's go, kind of bouncing off that back to what about just health things when it comes to masculinity? I don't know if you've, let me maybe kind of clarify, you're talking about all those statistics you laid out, lower testosterone, weaker hand strength, sperm count, all of these kind of social things that are extensions or maybe feed into this, right? How much do you think it's attached to, shame on me, and I keep, saying this, but like, or thinking this, but how much of my day is just spent looking at a screen,
Oh
and
yeah,
some
I
of it's the
mean,
nature of the job and stuff like that. But
yeah,
I mean, I love, I don't think I'll ever be able to pull it off. Maybe I can, but I would love 10 hours of my work week to just be outside with my hands in the dirt,
yeah,
and just doing something. If it's sunny out, I'm getting vitamin D.
yeah.
If it's cold out, I'm kind of
You're
building my toughness
getting
out a little,
cold exposure.
getting
That's
good
just a
cold
good thing too.
exposure, which, yeah, I do want to talk to you about. But, you know, though, like, we miss that. Like,
Mhm.
I definitely miss that, and I think that has a big effect. So what do you think about just our lifestyle, or maybe our diet, or how are these things also affecting what we're running into?
Yeah, I mean, properly speaking, you're way more into my wife's territory than mine now. Most of
Mm,
the healthy stuff I do at some point has been because my wife has got me back to that place. In my life, I was always a very in shape person, with the exception of a few periods in my life.
mhm,
Most of those sort of revolve around either doing a PhD or getting seriously ill, and not being able to really sort of recover from that, and sort of gaining weight as a process of that. And so if you look back on the pictures in 15, 17, you're going to see some pictures where I'm pretty heavy, but then just a few years before that, you'll see some pictures where I look a lot like I do now. And a lot of that has to do with, I got pneumonia, and I was in the hospital for a week, and I broke
mm,
4 ribs and lost lung capacity for a long time, and just couldn't get to the point, back to the point where I felt like I could do anything, until my son basically kicked me in the butt and said, "You're going to start mountain biking again, and I don't care if it's hard. We're going to work at it until you're better at it again." And God bless him, because his kick in the butt made all the difference again. My wife would say that a lot of the lack of healthiness that we sort of see now, and the obesity we have now, is not even people's fault as much as it is just how bad our food is
mhm,
now, and just how laced with things that we don't realize that it's laced with, that come with extra calories and chemicals that do things to our brain to make us want more food, and
mhm,
on and on and on, that we're never satiated. You know, it's there's all sorts of things against it. We live lives where we look at blue screens, which interrupt our sleep patterns. We don't go outside. We don't stand enough. We don't walk enough. We don't talk with other people face to face enough. We don't, you know, the relationships that we can have on phones make it so that we don't actually get in person, incarnate relationships with other people, which are incredibly mentally important for us. I mean, God designed us at the end of the day after Adam and Eve to be together. When he looks at Adam and he's alone, he literally says, it's not good for man to be alone, right? And now we've sort of carved out these lives for ourselves where we can be alone because we think we're with other people because we see an affect of them on a screen, and it's it can't be good, you know. Even it's not like we can all be farmers, but you know, it seems like at some degree that's what God intended, to get your hands in the dirt and to be outside in the sun and to be outside in the cold. And I don't know. This is not my I do some reading on it, but it's not my expertise. I love personally kind of where I am right now with things, but I'm always guarding against, you know, the periods of my life when that hasn't happened. And I like to say people who have lost a bunch of weight are always afraid that they're going to gain weight again. And that's sort of me.
Yeah. I'll notice if I have a busy day where I get a lot of good things done, I come out and I'm like, I'm worn out in a way that's, you know, I need to get down on the ground with my kids. And if I do that for like 20, 30 minutes, my battery gets charged again. But if I have a day, you know, I like where I'm outside all day long, mowing, do some edging, you know, I'm pulling out weeds, you know, I can do that for 8-9 hours and I walk away and I'm just loaded with energy. Like my body might be sore, but my mind's crystal clear and I'm excited and I'm happy. And it's such a polarizing difference between, you know, if I'm going in and out of meetings or, you know, I love Bible study or prepping for sermons or Bible studies, but still when I'm doing it, looking at a screen and I don't know, maybe if I just got the book out and took the screen away and took notes, maybe that would be better. I don't know. But either way, it's just using your body just seems to be so important. And we've left that.
Yeah. I mean, it's in a lot of ways that's all behind us and you have to very intentionally kind of get some of it back because it's not required. Like you don't need to do any of those things to feed your family.
Yeah.
You know, you can just do thought work to feed your family. And that's honestly most people in America these days. And which means that if you're going to do the other stuff that really like gets your body moving, you have to decide to go do it. Like when your body was required to do things for you to feed your family, you didn't have to think about like exercising or getting sunlight or anything, but it's not required now. And so you actually have to think about it. You actually have to decide to go for a run. You actually have to decide to go get some sunlight. You have to actually decide to go be out in the cold a little bit. These are things that you have to decide. Otherwise, they're not going to happen because your day-to-day life doesn't actually require them of you.
So what do you think? You mentioned before about sauna and cold plunge. What have you noticed with that? Because that's a passion. And
I mentioned that I haven't been home for more than 4 days at a time in about a month. And the one day I was home, I built a sauna on my deck. I mean, it was a prefab sauna. I like built. My friend Dave, who's here, and my friend Aaron helped me. It was like kind of like a Lincoln log building, but we did build a sauna in a day on my deck. But what do I think about it? I mean, I don't know tons about it. I've read the one book that's available on. It's not on cold plunging specifically, but it's on cold water exposure stuff by Suzanne Somberg called Winter
good.
Swimming. As far as I read it, all the data that she puts out there is fairly new, and some of it would fall into the category of qualitative more than quantitative. But I like that. I mean, I think any of these things that you should do, you can't just do because there's some data behind it. You got to do it because you like it as part of your routine, or you think it's good for you to be uncomfortable a little bit during the day, or you sleep better because you've been doing cold plunging or whatever. Some of the anecdotal benefits that come out of it are fine because I'm not trying to change the world with cold plunging. I'm just trying to make myself feel a little bit better.
Yeah.
Right. And so I don't need like, you know, peer reviewed data to do that. Sauna is a little bit different. I mean, there's data going back years on the benefits of sauna, including things like ability to fight infection, you're less likely to get things. People that sauna 3 to 5 times a week, longevity, heart rate stuff
Mhm.
and like coronary disease improvements and stuff like that. So there's way more data available on sauna just because they've been measuring it for a longer period of time, especially in Scandinavian countries.
Yeah. Well, they've even seen that if you took somebody who doesn't do anything
Yeah,
and
it's a
you don't
heart
want to have
rate
to choose
elevation.
between these two, but if
Yeah.
you had to choose between working out, 3 to 5 days a
Hmm.
week or sauna 3 to 5 days a week, hitting certain temperatures and
Yeah.
length of time
Got to
and
be
everything
above
like
like
that.
175 for 15
Yeah.
minutes.
Yeah, yeah. But the sauna is actually even better for you at least as far as longevity of life goes than even working out. Now,
Yeah.
obviously you don't want to pit if you can do the both of them together, that's even better.
Yeah.
But just to show the potency of getting your body exposed to those extreme heats, because your body then it has to protect its organs, and then it goes into a certain type of state where it releases these certain types of, I think it's proteins that are
Yeah.
hyper
Mitochondrial
restorative.
protein, I think is what
Yeah,
it is. Yeah.
yeah, and they're like just hyper restorative, so they go after all of these kind of
Yeah.
early diseases that are in your body, and because these proteins are running around looking for something, they start attacking and they start healing those
Yeah.
different areas.
I
So,
think it's also what I've read is that going into a hot sauna for 15 minutes, typical for a person that's like an off the couch kind of person, can raise their heart rate by like 25 beats per minute
mhm.
for that period of time, which is hard for people that can't run or something like that to maintain for that long. So
Hmm.
think of somebody who's 70 pounds overweight, which is pretty average for the average American to be at least 60, 70 pounds overweight. It's very hard to say, okay, the way you could really work on this is you need to get some cardiovascular exercise. You need to get your heart rate above 135 for 15 minutes to half an hour a day. That's hard because in order to get your heart rate that high, you actually have to. Walking typically doesn't do it unless
Mhm.
you're walking really fast or up a big hill or something like that.
Mhm.
You typically have to at least get into a jog. If you're that heavy, that's hard to do, but you can actually your heart rate can elevate to about like between 125 and 130 in a sauna while you're sitting there.
Yep.
And so it's
And if
like
you stand, I've gotten it up
yes,
to 175, no
yeah,
problem. If you're,
yeah,
pushing it towards the end and you're standing, doing some
yeah,
stretching.
yeah. So I think that's part of it too. Like I've got a good buddy that's trying to lose weight and he's walking every night, and I really wish he had a sauna too that he could go hop in.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. Which cold plunge do you have?
I've got the Legacy cold plunge. It's one of the sort of PVC inflatable with the chiller.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How,
So
how much was that?
I think it was with the chiller. It was like $1,500.
Oh, that's not bad.
I wouldn't necessarily recommend it.
Hmm.
But I have the chiller now, so if I need to sort of just get another tub, I
You
can
just,
hook the chiller to the tub. So.
yeah. Yeah. Um, hmm. Well, we've kind of circled around this. So at least, before moving on, maybe just kind of get back to the heart of, you know, what would be kind of your main advice for, for young men or for older men that want to kind of help the next generation, right? What's kind of the main thing that there needs to be a mental shift on? Like there's these tangible things we've hit on, try to be active, get outside, have a different mindset as far as like what family goes, parents, be in your children's lives, have these tough conversations
Yeah.
so that you set a kind of an attitude in the household where you can talk about tough things and you've got spaces for that. And therefore you're involved in their life. And it's not a surprise when you come to them at 14 and say, hey, I think we need to address this issue, right? It's not the first time you're trying to do that. So you kind of got all of that. But what's kind of the main cultural or mental shift that Christian men need to have to, overcome some of these issues?
Yeah, I'd say sort of in their life and in the faith, it's time to get rid of the dichotomy between your life outside the church and your life in the church.
Hmm.
You're a Christian in both places, and God has called you to be a Christian, and then He's also called you to live as a Christian too. And that living as a Christian doesn't just happen on Sunday morning; it incorporates everything. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to sort of be annoying to everybody in your life that's not a Christian. But you don't have to like virtue signal your Christianity everywhere you go, but your mental schema, doesn't click into secular mode just because you went to work on Monday morning and then into Christian mode just because you stepped onto the church property on Sunday morning. In your house, in your family, in the way you raise your kids, in the way you conduct yourself at work, how much effort you put into your work and trying to do the best that you possibly can in it. And, not robbing from your employer by spending half your time on social media that they're paying you for, and the whole 9 yards. Being ready with the forgiveness of Christ on your lips to everybody that God has put on your life, when appropriate and when necessary. This is an important mental shift change. On the As it relates to the health side, if I were to say one mental shift, and this is going to be real, like to come full circle, third use of the law style, stop being so freaking lazy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my Lord, like, the world is not set up for you to like be able to sit on your couch and eat Doritos and watch Netflix all day. This is not why you're here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're not here to serve just you.
Mm-hmm.
And realizing that gets you outside of your own little bubble. And once you're outside your bubble, you can actually start seeing your neighbor. And you're like, holy cow, there's people here. They love me and are serving me. And gosh, maybe I'm supposed to love them and serve them too. And then you'll realize that, it's not kind of really up to you whether or not marriage, whenever possible, and children, whenever possible, are a choice, or whether it's just part of the life of the Christian.
Mm-hmm.
In Wisconsin last week, I said to the guys, I'm like, listen, I'm not a Roman Catholic, but in their sacramental system, we always say they have 7 sacraments, but they really only have 6 that you as an individual could participate in. Because once you get past confirmation and communion, you're going to be faced with the choice of either marriage or holy orders.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it, right? It wasn't like you got to choose whether or not you were going to get married or stay single and not serve Jesus for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
It was get married or go into a holy order and serve Jesus for the rest of your life. Now, I'm not promoting that, but there's something to that not being a choice and it being a calling.
Mm-hmm.
Vocations are not calling or choices, they're callings. God calls you into them.
Mm-hmm.
And when we think of everything as optional, we create a universe that's so self-centered that this is inevitably going to creep into your view of your salvation too. Because if you think you can control everything, no matter what God says about it, you're going to believe that you control something when it comes to whether or not he saves you and how he does it.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to decide, well, maybe I don't like the way he did it. And maybe I don't like that he calls me or that he created me as a boy. So I'm going to decide to be a girl.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like that he says that my homosexuality is sinful. So I'm going to decide to say that love is love. And no matter what, God has to love me for who I am. You're going to start creating all sorts of weird stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need Christ's forgiveness. Christ didn't die for this sin because I don't see it as a sin.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're in real dangerous territory.
Mm-hmm.
You're really dangerous territory. You're flirting with your own salvation there. You're flirting with rejecting not only Christ, but the thing that Christ warns you not to reject, and that's the Holy Spirit.
Mm.
And stuff needs to be thought about, and it's all kind of fits together because we've created such a self-centered society that we can obviously see the effects on society, but it's affecting the church too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's affecting the individuals and how they see salvation
Mm-hmm.
and how they see Christ work for them, and whether or not it's his life, death, and resurrection alone that saves.
Mm-hmm. That does seem to be like a potent obstacle for us today because, sociologists have been saying it for a long time, but, they suspect that there's never been a more individualistic type culture is what we're running into, which makes sense because I don't know how you can capture the type of individuality focus we have without the kind of technology that's allowed us to be so alienated in a bubble where we're spending so much time just thinking of ourselves and portraying ourselves and trying to craft the way that we push ourselves to others. But, I was reading John 5 today, where Jesus keeps saying, whatever the Father has said, I say, I'm one with the Father. And then, of course, he says that again in John chapter 17,
Right.
where I've only said what the Father has
Yes.
told me to say. And if you kind of take that and then you contrast that with the temptation of Satan is tempting Jesus to do something that the Father has not told him to do,
Mhm.
and to kind of
Always.
use his own reason and strength over and against the
Always.
Father. So there's this aspect where Jesus is who he is, and his greatness is defined by how much he kind of becomes transparent to the Father's
Mm-hmm.
will. So he actually finds himself by losing his life. And then he tells
Right.
that to the church to say to do the same thing. So the problem that we run into is we're so obsessed with asserting ourselves
Right.
and asserting our choices
Right.
and our individuality, which is the exact opposite. You can maybe call it an extension of pride, but it's the exact opposite of what the Christian calling is, which is to become transparent to Christ and to kind of lose your life so that Christ pushes through you. But that goes completely counterintuitive to everything that our culture pushes about. You need to find yourself and you need to, tell others who you are and don't let anybody else tell you who you are.
Right.
And it's like, well,
That's
God
right.
is supposed to do that. I mean, it's just, that is the
God
obstacle we
actually
run into.
declares who you are
Yes.
in Christ. Yeah. It's funny. Pride is the opposite of Christianity. And you remember when pride was a sin? I do. And now it's
one of the chief.
It's an aspiration. You know? Now every aspiration is to be proud of being whatever marginalized group you can identify with. I was thinking, you said individualistic culture. It's a narcissistic culture. I mean, at least Narcissus had to go find a puddle of water in order to stare at himself. We carry around the thing that allows us to stare at ourselves in our pocket 24/7. And it's difficult to escape, but it ought to be escaped. I mean, it ought to be escaped to some degree.
I hate it because I've traveled around, a decent amount in my adult life now. We're in our second calls. We're in New England, then we're out here. So, a lot of my good friends are remote. A lot of them are back in Indiana where I grew up, and I've still got some great guy friendships. And so we'll do what we can, right? We'll FaceTime, we'll kind of have these times where we get together in the evening and, we'll have a beer or two and chat and kind of catch up. And there's that dang picture in the bottom right of myself. And you'll be talking and and then all of a sudden I'm driving, I'm looking at myself and I'm thinking about
we're
myself.
being filmed on the internet. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
There's irony to all of it. I mean, I think of that all the time. I think that this thing is the most dangerous invention in all of human history. Well, I mean, nuclear weapons are pretty bad. But I try to through 1517, we try to utilize it to reach people with the gospel. And so it's like all things. God can use what was intended for evil for good. And, we just kind of have to trust in that a little bit. But within our own lives and with our own families, it doesn't mean that we don't guard against it and just forcefully guard against it to just do not allow it to take over. He's called you. If you're a parent, he's called you to be a parent, not that phone, not your kid's school, not society, not their friends, not their friends' parents, not the soccer coach, you.
There's a moment in Paralandra. So it's where in Paralandra, it's kind of a recreation of the Garden of Eden scene to some degree in a fictional sense. And there's Ransom, who's kind of your protagonist, and then there's this possessed Weston, who's basically
the
devil, and he's trying to tempt this green lady who's like an Eve. And it's so beautiful the way Lewis does it, but the most brutal move that he makes is he gives her some kind of mirror so that she can see herself for the first time. And once that happens, then he starts portraying all of these images of herself that creates kind of this longing and almost like a lust after a version of herself that she can form if she kind of takes charge and makes her own decision to, I think stay here and not go, or go, whatever it is. It's, I think maybe to go to the solid land and off of, this island and
kill a beautiful bird with which to adorn herself.
Yeah. And it's just, he's so accurate there because
it's my favorite of the space trilogy.
Yeah.
For that reason.
Yeah. It's very potent.
Once you get to that hideous strength, you got to really tie in for the long haul.
Yeah. It's an orchestra and that, like, you have to wait to get to the crescendo. And that's what I wrote my master's thesis on. So I love that, but I dabbled into Paralandra too, to pull out the way that.
Did you read The Dark Tower too?
I did. I think excuse me. I think the very end I haven't finished, but that one it's not as polished, right? Because he doesn't publish
it's not finished.
Yeah.
It's like probably 4 chapters that should have been 12 chapters or something like that. But
there's some wild ideas that he puts forward in there about the one that struck me. I wonder if you had put any thought into this, but because he has this dialogue between these like professors and Ransom's actually part of this group, right? And I think McPhee's there too, but he's talking about how memory goes both directions.
Yes.
And it's kind of interesting. It's kind of a play on time that Lewis does in a couple of his places, but that memory can be something that has happened and sometimes things that haven't happened yet. But when that reaches our mind, we don't recognize it.
Yeah.
But that, and that basically he's kind of referencing towards, that's how prophecy might work for the actual prophets, right?
Yeah.
But that there's this wavelength on your mind that is in that which is eternally true but sometimes it's what hasn't happened yet. And that was just a mind blowing kind of
Lewis
conversation.
is astonishing.
Yeah.
His ability to create those pictures, to sort of envision things that were just sort of didactic to you before, but envision them as a story and a picture it's awesome.
I love that style. We've kind of lost that style of literature. Maybe not, but like Brothers Karamazov is that way. Job is that way.
Correct.
And then C.S. Lewis will play that out. But you can do so much more with fiction, with a story, because you can just create scenarios, you can create personalities, and then you let these things play out, and it takes on a 3-dimensional nature to where, to your point of like systematics, sometimes systematics is just the driest because it's 1 or 2 dimensional, but it's not 3-dimensional.
You know me here, but you need to go know me in your world, says Aslan.
Yeah. And there's a line in, I think it's not Prince Cat. I think it's the Silver Chair towards the end that always stuck with me. And it's, what is it? Prince Caspian, I think, is in like this island place. I can't remember who it is, but either way, oh no, Prince Caspian has died, right? Because he died of old age. So then he goes to this place, which is kind of the gateway to heaven, so to speak. And then Eustace, I think, is there, and he kind of sees Prince Caspian dead, and he's kind of shocked and very saddened by it. And Aslan's there, and Aslan says, "Well, yes, most people have died, actually. Very, very few haven't. In fact, I myself have died." And that is, I think, been the most...
Now you say that.
I'm going to say that on my deathbed. That's the most comforting one, is to remember, like 99.9% of people have died.
Yeah,
I'm one of the very
more.
few that haven't. And therefore, there's this kind of comfort of, on your deathbed, you're going to do what almost everyone has done, and you're one of the very few people who haven't done it yet.
Yeah, everybody that has been born will likely die.
Yeah.
Unless you live to see Christ come again. This will be your fate.
So what's some of your favorite works from Lewis? We can talk about that a little bit.
Perelandra is at the very top. I love Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I like Mere Christianity, but I recently sort of was part of a project where I was going through it with a big group of just sort of general evangelicals. And it illustrated to me how repetitive it is, and that was difficult for them. I kind of just wish we would have stuck for the case for Christ and kind of gone on from there. Obviously, I used the 4 loves quite a bit when I wrote Being Dad, and so that one is really close to me. The Great Divorce, I love quite a bit.
That one had a big impact on me the first time I read it. That kind of recalibrated my thinking in a healthy way.
My son used it as one of the kind of like, I guess I call it bedrock foundational aspects of his master's thesis. So,
yeah, that'd be good. Are you a big Tolkien fan too?
Not as much.
Okay.
In fact, we went through Lord of the Rings on Thinking Fellows, and I struggled. Like, I feel like I'm just not smart enough for Tolkien when I read Lord of the Rings. I can't keep up with it all. It doesn't keep my attention.
Yeah.
I can't stand Tom Bombadil. Like, it just all makes me crazy.
Who was it? It was John Davidson. We had John D. Davidson on, and we did 2 episodes, and the second one we mostly talked about Lord of the Rings and C.S. Lewis and whatnot, mostly Tolkien. But he had a theory about Bombadil. What was it? Was he an angel? Oh, I can't think, but
that would explain a lot why he drives me crazy.
Yeah, because he's there from before, even really the foundation of the world. And he's kind of untouched by even the evil of the ring.
Right.
He kind of, he's tossing it in his hand, and it doesn't faze him. In fact, who was it? Someone gives Bombadil their critique. He's like, "Yeah, don't give him the ring because he'll just lose it." Like he's so unaffected by its power and evil, doesn't mean anything to him. He'll just lose it.
I wish I was. My kids love Lord of the Rings, especially my second son Joshua. He's totally into Tolkien, and it's just not for me. I'm a Lewis guy. I like the direct analogies. I like the allegory. Everything that drove Tolkien crazy about Lewis's work, I love.
Do you think Jordan Peterson is similar to C.S. Lewis at all? Do you follow Jordan Peterson much or no?
I used to. I've read 12 Rules and what's the bigger edition? The Hegelian Nightmare, I call it. Maps of Meaning.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I don't so much follow him. I would say I don't follow him post whatever the Ben Shapiro channel he's on now. Before that, I I did a little bit. I like him. I mean, I think on the secular side, he does all right. There's no category for. I always said after I read 12 Rules, I wondered what he would say to the kid who woke up one day and didn't make his bed. Like, is there absolution there for that? I mean, is there gospel there for that kid when he fails? That's and he doesn't have to do that. Right? He's not a Christian. But the reason I wrote that critique at the time is because I was shocked at the number of Christians who believed he was a Christian and believed he was giving a Christian message. And I wanted to say that what you're hearing from him is the law. Now, the law is actually in both worlds in a way the gospel is not, which is why he can do it so well, and he can do it to the point where it sounds Christian, because it sounds like the Christian law. But this law is on your hearts too. This law is in nature too. Everything that God does reveal to you from nature will be revealed as the law, essentially, in one way, shape, or form. And so it's not surprising that he can make it sound like that. But what makes Christianity is not the law, but the gospel. And he's got no category for that because he doesn't believe in Jesus. He doesn't believe that Jesus was anything more than a possibly, guy that did a really good job at the law and kind of the best myth ever, maybe, but still a myth. And not the best myth ever in the way that Tolkien does that as like the archetypal eucatastrophe, because Tolkien's point about Christ being the best myth ever is it's the best because it's true. Kind of the
myth made fact.
Myth made fact, yeah. But that's not what Peterson's doing. So that makes me crazy. Peterson's closer to like Robert Bly with a little bit more oomph, a little more vigorous law than Bly had when he wrote Iron John.
That is a good example of what happens if you're using the law, whatever kind of use you want to call it. But if the second use is void, then that's what you're going to run into is a long list of things to do.
You get all natural law, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think about this? Can I just throw you kind of random biblical questions and just hear your thoughts?
Well, you can try.
Okay. You can punt on any of these
ask
too. These are not pre-planned.
A systematic guy, a bunch of biblical questions. We'll see how far we get.
So these are completely random. They're just kind of coming to me. But what do you think about Melchizedek?
Yeah. I mean, what do I think? I think he's sort of a prefigure, right? Christ is in this holy order. That Christ is the fulfillment of the entire priesthood at the end of the day, because he's both the priest and the sacrifice. So,
yeah. Have you heard the theory that he's a form of the pre-incarnate Christ?
That sounds like a Chad Bird thing to me, but I haven't, but I'm sure Chad has.
Yeah.
I like all of that. Like I love all of the angel of the Lord is always Christ stuff. I love it all. Okay. I love that it was Christ walking in the still of the morning with Adam and Eve. I love all of that. I have too much Rod Rosenblatt in me to be super definitive on it, like a lot of, or assertive on it, that like a lot of people are willing to. Like, I want to see more textual evidence before I say, yeah, this is what's going on here. And so I love talking about all of that, but I'm always on the side of, oh, that's interesting. I really wish, if that's the case, I really wish the texts were clearer about it. But so yeah.
Yeah. No, that's probably a healthy approach. It's okay to have an area where you can kind of dabble in and kind of hypothesize and play with, and then come back to shore and get back to your real sturdy areas where you can just certainly hang your hat, because the scriptures are.
I think it's great to have guys that are very assertive. I mean, Chad's very assertive about it.
Yeah.
And I love that, and Dan Price is very assertive about it, and I like that too. It's just I'm not. Rod beat that out of me, and I'm very empirical, and I'm going to need to see as much of the data as I can before I'm like, okay, this is the preponderance. Let's go that direction. It doesn't mean that I think they're wrong. I don't think they're wrong. I'm a little worried that I like it so much. I'm a sinner. So anytime I really, really like something, I'm like, oh, that can't be good. So,
yeah. We were talking to Jeff Boyle. He's a professor at Fort Wayne. And he just had this way of looking at history that was so interesting. And he just basically said there's only one true event in human history, and that's the death and resurrection of Jesus. And everything else is kind of this like extension of that one moment.
I think I believe that.
Yeah.
I like
kind of
that
taking
a lot.
that, the land that was what was it, that was slain before the foundation of the
Yeah.
world, and how there's this one reality, and then everything within time is kind of an extension
Yeah.
of that.
Built on it,
Yeah.
you know? Well, I mean, I've said before that, when Christ says, "I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life," that means that he is actually the truth and that all truths are measured against the fact that he is the truth. And
Hmm.
so um, you can't really play around with that without running into Christ. You can't play around with truth without very quickly running into Christ as the truth, right?
Hmm.
Truth can't become relative on this aspect and this aspect until you really run into the fact that then maybe Christ isn't the truth, and that's not a good way to go. But I really like the idea that Christ's death and resurrection are the one true thing in history, and everything else kind of migrates out from that.
Hmm.
That's cool.
Which makes sense if you're, back to our kind of previous point is the more you assert yourself, the more you're actually you're kind of physically removing yourself from that
Yeah.
one thing, which is true.
Yeah.
Which as long as Christ is the one in you working through you, you're focused, then you're actually focused on what is, you're kind of focused on the sun or the light. And then as you kind of keep asserting yourself, you're just kind of twisting yourself and moving and facing towards the darkness and
Yeah.
removing yourself from where
Yeah.
your life comes from.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Hmm.
It's all fun. Like, that's the kind of thing that makes people like, "Oh, you're such a nerd. Theology's fun." That's the kind of thing that makes theology fun.
Mhm.
Is sort of kicking some of these things around in your head and just like really getting. I mean, that's when you think about sort of even Melchizedek as like a pre-incarnate Christ. That's some gospel stuff right there. Like,
Mhm.
I love that. I just want to know that it's really the case before I say it to anybody definitively. I feel like sometimes when you're asked to come somewhere and teach, that if you say it, people believe it no matter what, and you got to be careful.
Yeah.
And when that's the case, you got to be careful and don't kind of lead them down a path where they're going to believe something that's wrong,
Mhm.
or at least say. That's why I would say something like that, but I'd say, "This is what I think,"
Mhm.
not "This is what I definitively know." This is what I think.
Yeah.
And I try to make a distinction between, like, a lot of what we did today. Some of that's my opinion, right? I
Mhm.
can't definitively tell you a lot of that stuff, but you were asking my opinion, so I gave it to you.
Mhm.
The stuff that's not my opinion is all of the sort of the first order gospel proclamation that we did here today. Like, Christ did die for you. He did raise again. It's the first fruits of your resurrection. That is definitively true.
Mhm.
A lot of other stuff that comes out of that, we're doing our best with.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why, by the way, I like to sit on this side. I
Yeah.
like to, have guests that are, have interests and passions and expertise in certain areas and kind
Yeah.
of let them speak. It puts less pressure. You kind of talked about the burden of preaching, and it is because you go up there and you go, "Oh boy, X amount of people are going to listen to this, and I've got to be very careful that I don't speak, incorrectly." And I don't use a manuscript. I work off of,
Yeah.
an outline and internalize, but I'm always kind of I try to be very careful and cognizant of, don't go into the hypothetical, too
Well,
much, or, in a way that you can, speak on your own behalf, and rather than, kind of what the text is
like,
really saying.
to my friends in a really safe conversation, I'll say a lot of things definitively, right? But this is on the internet. I don't know the hundreds or thousands of people that are going to see this, and I don't want to lead them astray. Like, I have strong opinions on like the proper swimming stroke, but I still wouldn't say that in a way that I knew I was definitively right, because there are people that are way better and way faster than me. Like,
Mhm.
and so you have to sort of you just have to be cognizant of your limit. I try to at least try to be cognizant of your limitations, and mine are vast. Even,
Mhm.
I mean, in theology they're vast, in history they're vast, in swimming they're vast. Knowledge of cold exposure and saunas. I'm found wanting, and I try to keep that in mind. That's part of what happens when you have a lot of different interests too.
Mhm.
Like, I think if I had one or two, I probably would sort of have a lot more opinions on those one or two that are way more definitive than they are. I'm a spread out kind of guy.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I'm a forest guy, not a trees guy, which
Yeah.
is why I like having people on that are, are trees guys. We're both. I mean, if
Yeah.
you get two forest guys, it's a really fun conversation. If you get a tree guy on, then you're just like, all right, take me down this rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, if you get guys on that you want to be able to talk about theology, politics, culture, exercise, you're going to have some forest guys too,
Oh, yeah.
because it's a broad conference, but I can see having a narrow one too. So.
Mhm. So we got maybe just a couple minutes, and I know you got to get to the airport here. Maybe kind of last question. What would be kind of your synopsis or your view on, where the LCMS is, where it's moving? What are some of your kind of hopes for things that really kind of take root here in the LCMS as we move forward?
That's right. I is it bad to say that I don't have a lot of those?
That's probably fair. Yeah.
I'm not in the system.
Yeah. And I guess I don't even mean politically, but maybe even just like culturally or theologically.
I've got some opinions about some things. Listen, the Lutheran Church is shrinking.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that it's not going to be around. It doesn't mean that we all have to sort of change what we're doing to try to make it not shrink. It doesn't mean any of that. But it probably does mean, and part of why it's shrinking probably isn't even its fault in the sense other than what we've talked about with sort of the demographics
Mm-hmm.
that are going on in society and how those are matched in the church, right? Some of this is just kind of what's happening in the world, and it's happening to us too.
Mm-hmm.
Could we have talked about birth control and everything differently in the past, where maybe it wasn't hitting us as hard as it is? Maybe, but we didn't. So here we are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's going to have to, especially in the LCMS, because it's the only one I know. I've been LCMS since birth. I don't know any other LCMS grade school and LCMS undergrad.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't know anything else. But I also don't know the system from the inside because I've never been a part of the system
Mm-hmm.
in a way. Never been a called worker. And so my opinions on that are kind of as a parishioner,
Mm-hmm.
really.
Mm-hmm.
Like I am a parishioner and at various churches and an elder at various churches. I think that I respect the heck out of the way that the LCMS is kind of taking a stand on making sure that every pastor that they have that goes into various churches are, as much as they can handle, equally educated
Mm-hmm.
to the task.
Mm-hmm.
But that's going to get harder and harder.
Mm-hmm.
Churches are getting smaller and smaller. Churches are going to, not be able to afford pastors
Mm-hmm.
moving forward, and how that's handled, whether that means a willingness to close more churches, whether that means a willingness to have, lay leadership in those churches step up on some Sundays or something. I don't have all the answers to that. And I'm sure people are thinking about that. So please don't take this as an implication that they're not. I'm sure they are. That's all going to have to be thought through in a pretty serious way. I mean, it's coming.
Yeah.
It's coming. Like I hear pastors saying now, there's so many churches that need a pastor. I'm like, yeah, there are now.
Mm-hmm.
But that's, there are not. The generation that's coming is very, very, very small compared to the generation that's going to glory, and this is going to have a giant impact. So yeah, a lot of churches need a pastor now, but I just personally don't think there's going to be as many of them in 5 or 10 years. And I don't think we know how to deal with that. My buddies have all said, the seminaries just aren't producing enough pastors to fill all the congregations. And I said, yeah, or maybe they are. And we have a false bubble of congregations going on right now. I mean, it would be weird to me that if the argument is more guys aren't going into the pastorate because society is more secular, that wouldn't translate to there being fewer churches because society is secular. And if there are fewer churches, training fewer pastors to fill those fewer churches makes sense. I don't know that, but that's just my gut reaction to some of those things. Like, our church is a great example. Like, we can't afford to call a pastor. I cannot actually foresee a day when we would be able to afford to call a pastor. I don't even know how we would get there. Like, I couldn't trace. I'm a decently smart guy when it comes to business stuff. I'm not sure I could even trace out the path for you of how we'd get there. We're lucky. We can get very good pulpit supply because of our connection to LCMS pastors down the hill through 1517. And so we can fill nearly and we have a ordained guy that goes to our church that's not the called pastor to that church. So we can do pulpit supply pretty well, but most people don't have those resources in their church to do that. and there's a lot of churches that are paying pastors based on endowments that churches have been left to do that, but aren't, what they're collecting on Sunday morning can't do it. I don't know the answers. And I've heard just by listening to my friends who are pastors that there are some things coming down the path. I don't want the LCMS to really go anywhere. I'm 52 years old. I've been here for 52 years. I don't want to go find something else.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, Dr. Scott Keith, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for your time. This was great.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Hope you have a good flight back.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. Cheers.